Theo. Welcome, Theo. Hi. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, everyone. And welcome to the July meeting of the Exmoor National Park Authority. This happens only occasionally, but I get to do this once a year. But this morning, I would like to ask for nominations for the new chair of the authority. But before I do that, could I take a minute and just say a few words about Robin? Sorry, Robin. I've known Robin for many, many, many years, more than I care to remember, but for the last 6, I think now, he's been chair of the authority, and he's been a fantastic chair. He's nationally respected and he's locally respected, and that takes some doing. And I think the connections that Robin has have been amazing and been really helpful to us with DEFRA, with the NFU, with Dartmoor, with ministers, with media, and that's been really invaluable in opening doors. He listens to everyone. He supports people and he sets a tone of partnership, which I think has been fantastic. You'll see there's some images that I sneakily snuck in last night. Thank you, Mark at IT. Of various visits that we've had. We had quite a flurry of activity on the visits front, particularly in the early years, didn't we, Robin? We had Michael Gove, who was the Secretary of State there, and we had Lord Gardner, Julian Glover, Daniel Seichner, and then, of course, we had the big picnic, which was Exmoor recognising, there it is, 70 years of national parks. So that was the anniversary, and we're really proud to host that at Simmonsbath. And his support has been amazing too, particularly for things like the Hill Farm Network and Young Rangers and the wider Exmoor community. So thank you, Robin. Thank you for being a great chair. We will miss you. So now, can I ask for nominations? Have Mike?
I'd like to nominate Andrea Davis.
Thank you. Any further I need a seconder. Thank you. Do I have any other nominations? Absolutely sure. Okay. Andrea, welcome. Thank you. Andrea, if you'd like to come up and sit near me somewhere, that would be wonderful, and we'll go through the nominations for the planning and the deputy. Yeah? Yeah?
Can I just move my back up a bit? It's not there's anything in it, it's just it's being
Okay, so finally we've got one nomination. Please could I ask a show of hands to confirm you consent to the appointment to the position of chairperson of the authority. That's unanimous, thank you.
Thank you. Right.
Right.
Agenda, sorry.
That's all right. Agenda.
No.
Thanks, Judy.
So now it's the deputy chair following the same.
I probably should have done it. Right. So, item 2 is election of deputy chairman. Are there any nominations? Stephen?
I'd like to propose Mr. Milton.
Could you put your microphone on so we can hear the recording?
I'd like to propose Mr. Milton, please.
Is there a seconder for that? Sharon? Are there any other nominations? All those in favour? Thank you. Robin, congratulations.
Thank you very much. I will do my best to support.
Thank you. Sorry, you have to bear with me. Right, apologies for absence. Oh, sorry. Item 3, election of deputy chairperson planning. Nominations, please. Stephen?
I'd like to nominate Dr. Mike Kelly.
Thank you. Is there a second for that? Dr. Warren, thank you. Any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Stephen Bugsy.
Thank you. Is there a second for Stephen?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Right, now what do we do?
Any more?
Oh, really? Are there any further nominations? Right, now I need to get some advice.
I will walk around with voting slips, write the name of the person you would like to be the chairperson planning, and then I will come and collect them.
Can't we get them to make a speech?
Yes.
Just to make life interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'm happy with that, if that's, would everybody like that? Deputy Chairman planning. So Deputy Chairman planning.
I put the wrong form, but this is the planning. Sorry.
Okay. So I think the only way we can do this is in alphabetical order.
This is planning.
As we're going to ask the
Using the wrong form.
two candidates to give us no more than 2 minutes, please.
This is the planning. I just used the wrong.
Well, that's quite enough to sell yourself, isn't it? No. Not too much. There's something dinging. Okay, right. 3 minutes then? So we'll go alphabetical order. Dr. Kelly, followed by Mr. Pugsley. Dr. Kelly.
Well, thank you, Chair. I can't say that I was prepared for this at all. Mike?
Mike. Good start.
I'm not sure that... Is that on? Can you hear me? Right. No.
Little red light comes up.
I know, it's not bad. Right. That's fine. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak, albeit for only 2 or 3 minutes. I'm not prepared for this at all, but I am interested in taking on a more responsible role with the National Park Authority. And I see this as, if you like, a reasonably gentle introduction to that role. So I'd be very happy to step up and try and assist in that. In terms of my experience, obviously as a Chief Planning Officer, I was advising several planning committees over many years, and I am qualified, of course, in planning matters and surveying matters, so I think I've got some experience that I can offer. And hopefully during the last couple of years I've been able to contribute positively to some of the discussions, including some of the difficult discussions regarding particular planning applications. So I will be able to bring that to bear in terms of any decision making, and in terms of the forms that we're looking at, I think also I'm bringing a fresh pair of eyes into where we're going, and I think that would be helpful in itself, although I do of course respect everything that's been going on up to the present time. So I think I can bring professional experience, I can bring a new perspective in terms of a changing planning agenda, because there are real challenges out there and we need to be fully aware of that. And hopefully I'll be able to support the authority in that particular role. Thank you.
Stephen.
Well, like Dr. Kelly, I'm equally unprepared for this opportunity. I think if I bring anything to the role, it's a degree of independence in that I have no allegiance to any planning bodies or any personal involvement in planning. So I think that helps in being able to strike an independent line as chairman of the planning section of the authority. I have had experience as chairman here of planning for 3-4 years now. Before that I was chairman of planning at West Somerset. So in terms of chairing of planning committees, I think I now do have a reasonable amount of experience there. One of the pleasurable tasks as a councillor is to visit parish councils and town councils, and I have to say that in doing that one does gain a very wide perspective on what planning needs to be and how responsive it needs to be to local interests to applicants, to be fair to everybody, and it is sometimes very important to be able to hear what is said, and I do think that my frequent visits to parish and town councils does mean that I get that perspective. The final thing that I think is perhaps helpful is that because I am on the Somerset side of the National Park, that does mean that perhaps in terms of the now elected chairman and deputy chairman, it does introduce a degree of balance, because it would mean that you would have a Somerset deputy chairman planning and a North Devon chairman and deputy chairman. So a few points there, but as Dr. Kelly was kind enough to say about me, I have to say that the insights and experience that Dr. Kelly has brought to the planning committee has been invaluable, and I personally have appreciated hugely the experience that he has been able to bring as a member of the committee.
Thank you. So, members, you've all got a ballot paper in front of you, and Jude will come round in a moment and collect them all from us.
Chairman, I didn't hear you earlier, but Marcus did say he didn't think he'd be here this morning.
Yeah,
to me last night.
fortunately we've got his apology, so I'll do that in a second. In the right order, of course.
Yeah.
I will get this right.
Okay, no problem.
I'm very happy, members, please, I'm very happy to congratulate Stephen on his election as Deputy Chairman of Planning. Congratulations. And well done, Mark.
Could I just say that Dr. Kelly, I am sure, would have made a fine chairman, and I look forward to working with him in the committee during the succeeding year and benefiting from his wisdom and experience.
Very generous words, thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, I don't know who's supposed to be sat here.
Well, normally I do.
Yeah. Yeah. While we're moving chairs a moment, we'll just have a little pause. So, moving on to item 5 is declarations of interest and lobbying and unaccompanied site visits. I will go round the room. I'm going to start with myself because, strangely, I do have an interest to declare. Oh, apologies for absence. I will get to that. So, apologies we've received is Andrew Bray, who unfortunately will miss his first meeting, but he had a prior appointment, and Marcus Kravis, who might turn up for planning. Please stand here. Thank you. Right, we'll now do the declarations of interest, which I do have one of, please, Judy. So it's item 9. It's a personal interest. My son works for Devon Audit Partnership. Stephen.
Mike.
Sorry. Yes, I was surprised to be lobbied.
Microphone on, Mike. Microphone, sorry.
I was surprised to be lobbied. It doesn't matter now because about the election of a chairperson. I think we were all lobbied, and I was disappointed to think that an outside body would try to influence the committee's decisions.
I think we probably all received that email.
Yes, I was going to.
I haven't voted.
No, I haven't seen it.
Exmoor Society.
Oh, that.
Oh, I didn't read that.
Well, I know they asked the county council who they thought.
Right, I'm going to just, can we just keep moving on? Theo? No.
No, apart from the letter from the Exmoor Society.
Ditto. I'm the same.
Letter and a member of Dalton Town Council.
No.
No, but I don't think the Exmoor Society letter was an attempt to influence the election. I think that's an interested body in civil society that was making some comments at the right time to do so. I didn't feel it that way. I didn't think that was a problem.
No, likewise I had the letter and I would support what Dominic just said about how I interpreted the letter and I thought it was very useful.
Sorry.
So, no other conflict of interest. Yes, I got the letter. I support what Dominic said and I didn't feel that it was inappropriate and I thought it was actually quite helpful in trying to continue to support and encourage us to look at that agenda in a forward-thinking way.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on now to item 6, which is chairperson's announcements. And firstly, I'd like to thank you all for having some confidence in me to be your chairperson, and I really look forward to the next 12 months. And I hope that we can continue in the spirit of friendship and collaboration and partnership to take the authority forward. I'd like to thank Robin. It's been absolutely incredible to work together. I will absolutely put my hands up and say I am not an expert in farming, and frankly it fills me with horror when people ask me complicated questions, but Robin has taken that on beautifully and I'm sure he's going to be doing that again. I'll just stick to all the local authority stuff, and I'm good at lobbying, but that's it. And Stephen, congratulations. You've done a great job and it's good to see that you're going to continue. And then we've got some new appointments, so it's quite an exciting time of the year. Parish council appointments. Mike's been reappointed. Jeremy, welcome back. It's a bit strange saying that because we haven't actually departed from each other. Andrew's here now. We've got Bill. Welcome, Bill. And Nick. Welcome back, Nick.
Thank you.
So there's, I'd say, some of them no break, but I'm sure you'll make Bill and Andrew feel very welcome. And Andrew can't come, I think, because of prior appointment. And Penny has ceased to be a parish member, and she's asked that we pass on her best wishes to all members and staff. And I think it would be really nice if we actually sent her a little thing to do that, thanking her. So Penny's been a member for a number of years. We're still waiting the Secretary of State to confirm the vacancy left by Linda Blanchard, whose term ended at the end of June. And as soon as we hear, we'll email you all that so you know who that is. Thank you. Item 7, we need to...
Madam Chairman, would you allow me to say just a couple of words at this point?
Absolutely, certainly.
I think we ought to note the death of Molly Groves. Many of us will know a lot of her interactions with the authority. We know she called herself a revolting peasant. We know that we didn't agree in many ways. We also know that we did agree in many ways about always being determined for the good of the future of Exmoor, even if we have different views on how that might be. We should note that what we have just done in electing our planning chairman is what Molly instigated. We only have the written secret ballot because Molly was worried about how we made sure that we did things properly. And we took that on from her. And we ought to remember a long life. She worked for the authority. She was a thorn in the side of the authority, and she was a great advocate also for certainly some of the things the authority was doing, and we should just remember her.
Stephen.
And could we, in remembering Molly, also remember Sue Freestone, Vivian White's widow, who also died a very few weeks ago, and only a very few weeks after Vivian.
Thank you both, and I'm sure it's very shocking news about Vivian's wife. That's very much sobered us up, hasn't it? So I'm now going to move on to item 7, which is minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 2nd of May. Can I have a proposer of their correct record? Jeremy Holton, thank you. And a seconder. Thank you. Jeremy again. So I'm going to go through those to make sure they were correct, that there's any matters arising from those minutes. So page 1.
Yes, Andrew.
Yeah.
Note it says there, appointments, Secretary of State appointments. I presume that we haven't been informed as to who Linda Blanchard's replacement is going to be yet, in spite of the recommendation having gone to Secretary of State more than 2 months ago.
No, we don't know yet. Sorry. As soon as we know, I'll make sure an email goes out to everybody and we can welcome our new member. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Thank you. Item 8 is public speaking. All public speakers of the planning part of the meeting, and therefore we'll hear from them this afternoon. And then item 9 is the internal audit arrangements, and just a reminder that I have declared a personal interest. So over to Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. So we're joined this morning by Ken Johnson, who's joined us remotely. He did want to be here in person, but it wasn't possible, unfortunately. But he will talk to us today about the work they undertook in the last financial year and their plans for the current financial year. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Chair, and members.
Ken?
Oh.
Are you on mute?
No.
Not according to me.
I'll unmute again. Is that better? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Hello?
If you just hang on 1 minute, Ken, we'll get somebody to have a look. Okay, Ken, do you want to just start speaking and we'll see if it comes through okay?
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yeah, you can hear me now? That's great. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Chair and members. My name is Ken Johnson. Apologies for the technical glitches. You'll have to tell me if I disappear off the sound again. It was my intention to come up and speak to you all in person today. Some of you who've been there a while may remember Dominic Measures, who used to sort of manage your audits. I'll be taking over from Dominic from now. So hopefully you won't see too much of me, but yeah, I'll be I'm dealing with you from now on. So the report before you is obviously for you to recognise the work that's been done over 22-23 and the plan for the work that we intend to assist with in 23-24. Obviously, the introduction we'll go through on page 3 is why we do what we do, and if anybody wants to stop me and ask questions, feel free to do so. As I say, it's not something that, and if you understand it, that's great. If you don't, if you want to ask questions, that's absolutely fine. So members are requested to consider the opinion statement within the report. Look at the completion of the work, how you feel it's relevant, and scope and opportunity, the findings provided, and the overall performance and satisfaction on audit delivery. It's really important. We use that diagram that you can see there with the 3 bubbles, which is risk, internal audit, and counter fraud. I can sort of let you know that my professional background is really in counter fraud. So I've been working in counter fraud and audit for about 15 years. But certainly we can have a talk, an extended talk at some point about counter fraud work and how we can assist with that. So going into the actual statement itself, you'll see that the boss of Devon Audit Partnership is happy with the reports. He's therefore given a substantial assurance on your key financial systems, which is as good as it gets, which is really, really good. And on the information governance, which is also included in cybersecurity, you've got a reasonable assurance. I'm sure there will be questions around that, but reasonable assurance in cybersecurity is not a bad thing. It's in fact very good. Cybersecurity changes all the time. Cyber attacks change all the time, and it's really, really, keeping your eye on the ball and keeping up with it is really important. So, be very unusual for you to get a substantial assurance on a cyber risk at the moment. Obviously, we've supplied these documents to your leadership team, and there are no significant weaknesses, which is really, really important as well. So it's gone really well, and you'll see from what the boxes there at the bottom of that page, substantial assurance is as good as it gets, and reasonable assurance is pretty good. And as I say, considering the area that is in, I include in cybersecurity, I would take that as a real positive. So on the executive summary, basically it outlines the work that we did. Obviously there's a real pat on the back for the finance team and the work that they do. They have sort of maintained the highest standard possible, so that's really, really pleasing. And the IT section that we've dealt with have been really transparent in the way that they deal with us. And reasonable assurance, as I say, is not a bad thing. It's quite a good thing in that area. And you've had a lot going on in that time, so there has been a bit of slippage on a couple of tasks, but it is what it is, and it's really good assurance. To go into the plan next year, very much of the same. Not because we just like doing that, but because key financial systems are really, really important, and obviously cyber security is an ever increasing threat. So we'll keep an eye on those things for you as well. As I say, if there are any major findings, we would come back to you with them, and we hope to be sort of back with you this time next year with an even better report. But what I would say for now is, the staff would be to be commended, because the cooperation that we've had at fairly short notice sometimes has been really, really helpful to us to fulfil the audit requirements for last year. So all in all, a really healthy report. And if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Well, thank you so much. That was very clear. Members, any questions? a complete blank. Mandy, sorry. I will get there. I'm so sorry. Mandy.
Thank you, and may I pass on my congratulations to appointment, Chair. And you do know who I am. It's just a lot to take on today. So just a quick comment firstly to just back up that huge thank you to the staff. It's actually a very positive report. So huge thank you to them. This is sort of 365 days a year. They work hard to get a sort of great assurance like this. So firstly to pass that on. There was a lot in the report on cyber security, actually more than I've ever seen in any auditor's report, so obviously very heavy on that side. And I have two questions. Firstly, I know that every auditor will look to add value, if possible. So I wasn't sure, and I know I heard you say about reasonable assurance, but I don't know whether there are any pointers or tips that were passed on to help that reasonable assurance to edge it towards substantial if possible. I know it's difficult in cyber security. And my second question is, I'm always keen for us to have assurance that if something comes up in the year, there's the flexibility to be able to add something to any piece of audit work. So it's just that reassurance that the flexibility is there if needed. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, through you, Chair. I think might have a little bit of a delay on here. Sorry, I'm interrupting you.
Now we're doing a stalemate thing.
Yeah. Through you, Chair. The first question. Yes, obviously we will keep in touch, and there are a couple of pointers that have been pointed out within the more detailed audits themselves for your teams, and they will be ongoing. And we're looking. We work quite sort of close to the guidelines for the National Cyber Security Centre now, and that will form sort of the basis of the way we approach it next year. And obviously, Craig, who audits you on that, will supply that information. As I say, what you've got is a really, really good basis now of information governance and cyber security. What we just need to do is fine-tune it and make sure that you're sort of compliant with best practice wherever you can. As you say, cybersecurity is an ever-changing threat, and getting substantial assurance is really, really difficult. Getting cyber insurance is really difficult. So that'll tell you how difficult that sort of thing is. And working with the National Cyber Security Centre, I think they had over 2 million reports last year and pulled down over 125,000 web pages and email addresses. So that gives you some idea of the scale, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So yeah, it's an ongoing threat area. We know that every organisation faces this sort of scenario. And as I say, with my sort of background in counter fraud, I'm even more keen to sort of push that if we can. In the plan, you're absolutely right. There is flexibility, and we will always, even if you want, even if something came out of left field that neither of us had seen, we would absolutely. I mean, there are flexible days in there, so we could adapt anyway. But if you wanted to include more days, that's absolutely fine. But yeah, we want to be as flexible as we can with you, because with the best intentions, none of us can look into the future, and we'll keep it as flexible as we can.
Any further questions from anybody? Ken, can I ask a question? In the internal audit plan for 22-23, you've got the final bullet point is AGS. Probably everybody else knows what that is. I don't.
Annual governance statement. So if we were to find anything substantial issue, so significant weaknesses in your either of the audits that we did, that would have to be included in your annual governance statement. And that's why I think on page 4 I put that in bold. There are no significant weaknesses have been identified, so it's really not anything that you need to include in your annual governance statement.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say before we go to receiving the report, is that I just want to highlight to members the paragraph on page 5, just before it says Internal Audit Plan 22-23, and the comments about our staff and doing an exceptional job. And I think we just need to note that we do have exceptional staff who are really going above and beyond. And as I mentioned in my interest, I do know the Devon Audit Partnership don't always have prompt responses from some of the agencies they deal with, because I hear somebody at home moaning under his breath occasionally. And I just want to make very clear, he never ever gets involved with Exmoor National Park Authority, he's not allowed to. But I think that is a feather in your cap, Gordon, and indeed the team, so thank you very much. Right, members, we need to receive this report, so can I have a proposal, please? Dr. Kelly, thank you.
Propose it.
Thank you, Evelyn. All those in favour? Thank you. Ken, can we thank you for coming along? Sorry about the technical hitch, but it's been a great pleasure to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, and thank you, Gordon, and I'll see you in the other side. Thank you.
Yeah, sounds a bit worrying. And staying with Gordon, we move on to item 10, and the outturn from 22-23.
Thank you, Chair. So, item 10 of the agenda splits into two sections. The first section details the outturn report, and the second part details the draft statements of accounts. So if I can start with item 10.1. So this report details the financial performance for the year 22-23. Members will be aware that this is again another year where we've had a cash freeze of National Park grants, although we did receive an additional core grant of 440,000 of one-off funds from DEFRA. And please also note in 1.3 it mentions all the other income that we received in the year, which is another 2.2 million. So which is really quite impressive across the broad range of sort of trading services that we do cover. Item 2 of the report and Appendix 1 details the core budget outturn. So that looks at ongoing services and it details spend against budget. Section 2.4 details those variances that were above £5,000. And please note as well that the numbers contained within Section 2 and Appendix 1 are after the use of reserves. And there are some significant use of reserves that will take you through later on. Also, of course, contained within the core budget, but not evident on the face of it, is the revenue spend that was received from revenue grants. So, of course, there's the PIPL spend and the accessibility grants, for example, that isn't obvious on the face of that report, but the spend is contained within it because it nets to zero. So there's some significant activity there. Item 3 and Appendix 2 details those fixed terms programmes. So this is the additions to reserves and fixed term priorities that the authority decided to support. So the Appendix 2 details those spend, and just to note that this was the first year of the operation of the one-off pot to support external groups, and the service manager responsible for that hasn't asked for a top-up, so we're continuing to work down that sum. Also of note within that is that of the money that we set aside for the Pinkery Outdoor Education Centre, some of that money has been drawn down to assist with the decarbonisation programme. So those are the key activities there within that section. Section 4 and Appendix 3 shows our position and use of reserves in the year. So it does, on the surface, appear that there is an increase in the amount of reserves. However, that doesn't necessarily tell the true picture, because of course there is income from the legacies that you know about, the 450,000 of one-off money that we'll be looking to show. There's also, of course, the £440,000 of additional core grant, which is reflected in there. And it's also, of course, the fact that we have been advised by the auditors to show the receipt of income on the long-running planning dispute. So even though we haven't received any income as yet, we have been asked by the auditors to recognise that income. So that is reflecting an increase in reserves as well. And of course, but we're not looking to spend it as yet until any comes through, so it's been parked in reserves, if you like. So 4.3 and 4.4 of the report detail the main additions to reserves and take from reserves. And 4.5 is a key section because this details the movement in reserves that I'm asking members to approve today. So you'll be aware that as a consequence of the long-run planning dispute, significant funds were taken out of the legal contingency and the general contingency reserve. And we've also had big spend in year from development management due to use of external contractors, and we've also transferred some money to the modernisation reserve to assist with the cost of transition. And what we're asking for that 440 to do is to top back up some of those pots. And the second bullet point of 4.5 details the allocation of funds from Cairnmore in year that you'll see. So even though the level of reserve appears robust, members will be aware that there is a clear downwards trend, and it's the additional core grants which help a great deal in keeping our financial health up. Section 5 and Appendix 4 details, just Section 5 details the capital spend in year. So members will be aware that the auditors are encouraging us to produce a capital budget in year and to show capital spend specifically. We always previously showed it, but we showed it within the revenue budgets because it was mostly revenue funded. But of course now we're actually separating out a section and showing specific capital spend. So the table below 5.1 shows our capital spend there, and of course £300,000 almost of reserve of spend is a significant amount. And of course there's also one-off project spend which is funded from revenue but that isn't being capitalised but still feels like capital in a sense, so the completion of the car park scheme at the Valley of Rocks, for example. Section 6 is in-year budget monitoring. So the auditors are asking that we report on budget monitoring 3 times a year now to members. So this is of course the month 2 report that goes to you. So we're not looking back anymore. This is the in-year spend, and of course because it's only month 2, it's very difficult to see trends rising at this point in the year. But if there was anything to report, this would be our opportunity to do so. The only thing to note is of course that the car park trade does appear to be pretty brisk at the moment. We've had a really good start to the year. There are no breaches of prudential indicators to report to you today either. So moving on, this is an opportunity as well to update the medium-term financial plan if there have been any sort of changes to those assumptions. So obviously when we set the budget for 23-24, it was with certain assumptions contained within it. One of those related to the increase of pay, for example. So the staff and member pay award for 23-24 has yet to be agreed, but the employer's offer suggests that it will be at least 1% more on average than what was budgeted for. So they're again looking at a fixed amount increase to staff pay, which when you show it as a percentage looks like it will be at least 6%. So that will of course increase the savings gap from that which was presented in March when the forward budget was presented to you, and that's shown within the table in 8.3. So this is still an area of concern. So even though we were able to find almost £300,000 worth of savings in setting the budget for 23-24, I think it's going to be harder in future years. And I think it's really important that we remain focused on that, because that is key to our financial health. So I am mentioning in 8.6 that I think it's really key that there's certain, so as well as the making clear progress towards the revenue savings gap, it's also the fact that we can make progress on some asset sales, because obviously as was built into the programme were certain assumptions around asset sales in order to fund the capital programme. So I really think it's key that we remain focused on these key areas before we think again about new endeavours that could be approached. But there is of course a lot to be positive about as well. The reserve position is strong. We still have significant assets. A very large amount of FIPL funds will be received this year and the next, and we have a really good record of delivering those. And we're in a strong position to be awarded a large amount from the National Heritage Lottery Fund. So that is my paper, Chair.
Thank you. Over to you, members. Any questions? John.
Thanks, and thanks, Gordon. And it's, on the face of it, it's an encouraging report, isn't it? But I mean, it's so worrying because last year we kind of escaped it by the skin of our teeth by £440,000 popping up to the last unexpected minute to plug a hole that would not otherwise have been pluggable without a severe dent in the reserves you're talking about. That had been increased by hypothecated bequests that don't really help the financial situation very much. And I can see why you're going, because you're leaving this for your successor. But one thing that we as members need to do, I think, because we talked about this at the last time you met, was that we have a tendency sometimes to prevaricate too long about awkward decisions that that change things, and we need to perhaps sink our teeth into these sooner than we have done in the past, because if we don't, we're going to be going bust. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Francis, I think you were next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got only one question. I find dealing with financial papers difficult. It's not my native language. I try hard. I've one question and one thing to say. The question relates to page 4 of this report, which is page 26 of the whole lot. Explain, if you in words of one syllable, because spend to save. If we're spending on centres to improve the offer of appearance, why is that spend to save? It's the bottom bullet point in the top section.
The name of the reserve is the National Park Centre Spend to Save Reserve. So it's money that we set aside to invest in the services and to improve it generally.
Right. So the spend to save isn't actually specifically we have decided to do this in order to save money for, down the line.
It doesn't have to, no, it's not that narrowly focused, no.
Right, okay, that's fine. It's a question of the nomenclature. That's fine, I understand now. But the second thing is, I absolutely agree, we have no business to not to think about the future. We ought to. And I just, and while the, oh, hang on a second. Is the question of the reserve, the 40,000 spent out reserved for Pinkery, in this paper or the next paper?
That's contained within this paper. So
right, okay. Now, just to tell me, in the accounts it said it had all been spent. Just to check that it was spent, it wasn't spent because the Pinkery made a loss on its trading, but it was spent in as part of the modernisation. Is that right?
Yeah, so the money is set aside
in case there's a loss.
In case there's a loss. But as it turned out, it was helpful to relieve some of the pressure on the Environmental Resilience Reserve. Yeah,
that's fine. I thought that was the case, but there is a point somewhere where it said Pinkery potential Pinkery overspend, approval all spent. Just checking that it wasn't actually overspend. It was spent because on the environmental works. Yeah.
The annual allocation was all spent because that's 20,000 annual allocation.
Again, it's a question of nomenclature. Yeah, thank you. Now, the thing I wanted to say, I'm only mentioning very, very tiny things now, and of course we've got to think an awful lot further. One of the ways of potentially thinking about member costs is whether we have 2 vice chairmen or 1. That's a question for the future. And another one is, in another place, when there wasn't much money around, the first thing that happened was we stopped feeding ourselves lunch. We brought our own with us. Those are 2 tiny things that perhaps we could think about. And there are, of course, much other and bigger things, but just as a start.
Yes, I certainly think we need to be focusing on the larger things because the sums that John referred to are substantial.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate they're very substantial, but I don't think we ought to leave any stone unturned.
Thank you. Any further comments? Oh, Susan, I wrote you down.
Thank you, and thank you, Gordon and the team, for this really helpful report and for such prudent financial management in such continually difficult times. It's really just to pick up on Francis' point and John's in terms of, we sat here kind of last year and everyone was like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do, kind of thing. Obviously this year the debt for additional grant has come along and helped, but we spent a lot of time in meetings and so much staff time was spent on looking at options, what we could do and we might do, and obviously we didn't necessarily need, we were sort of saved by the bell kind of thing with the debt for additional grant. So I'm just sort of flagging the point that obviously we're going to have to revisit that again, but my concern would be that an awful lot of work is put in directly by officers to put suggestions forward, but we didn't necessarily have to take action this year, but we will need to take more action in future years, and it comes back to the point of making decisions and not, so much time and effort goes into all these options, but if we don't act, these problems won't go away and they will just continue to grow. So it was just flagging that, and it is, DEFRA has sort of made things easier this year, but we see from these numbers nothing is just changed fundamentally. So I think we need to revisit all the work that's already been done and not start again and go right. There's so much things done already. We need to really take that forward in the coming months. So thanks.
Robin.
Thanks, Andrea. It's along a similar vein, actually. I think Saved by the Bell has got to be the title of this report somehow. Can't see any other way of putting it, Gordon. I'm not quite sure. It just seems to me that we cannot expect actions on Dartmoor to bail us out to the tune of 440,000 next year or the year after. It was very good of them to engage in the route they did. We didn't realise we were going to benefit quite to that extent. But I think within your report, probably paragraph 8.6 is the one that is most important to me, and I think that needs highlighting. I think we have, as Susan alluded to as well, been horribly guilty of can kicking, and not been brave enough to make decisions which may potentially not be the most popular ones. Financial decisions running an authority like this, with inflation running at circa 10% and our national park grant effectively diminishing, are likely not always to be entirely popular, but we're going to have to develop a skin thick enough and brave enough to make some decisions that are in the best interests of the long term of the park, whilst actually recognising there's going to be a few toes trodden on. And if it's not someone else's toes, ultimately it will be the toes of this authority. We cannot allow ourselves to get into a financial position where we cannot function properly as an authority. And I think an awful lot of that, to my mind, determines around things that we've got that are ongoing at the moment and staff have put an awful lot of work into. And that's whether a lot of that will be covered, I know, is it next week, the week after, the workshop that we've got. But we need to be really clear. For example, one of the things that just springs to mind instantly was following discussions we had at the Parish Consultative Forum last week, where we've talked for 12 months, 18 months, around car parking and toilets and so on. If we continue kicking the can down, we will keep paying. And after all, the reality is, with all of that, none of our local councils, whichever side of the border, give us anything for free anymore. I don't get free parking in here because I'm local. I don't get free parking when I go to Barnstable because I'm local. There's a feeling within it that we're going to have to be brave enough to take difficult decisions to make sure that we maintain the position that we have and can present sets of accounts and balance sheets like we have done so far. And that's credit to Gordon. Probably hasn't made him entirely popular always, but that's some of the joys of doing that role. And I think members have to be willing to look at it clearly and support it in the future.
Thank you, Robin. Very valuable points. Dr. Kelly.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just staying with paragraph 8.6, make it easier for all of us. Agree entirely with what Robin's just said, but it talks about disposing of the property that we have an order for sale on, so that our liability can be established. And of course, this seems to be related to a long-running planning dispute, and I just wonder whether there is an end to this, because these are not trivial sums. And it might be useful if we could just perhaps go to, I think it's paragraph 4, here we are, 4.3 and 4.4, it talks about paragraph 4.4 contingency fund. I accept what's been said about transferring to reserves. 100,000 was withdrawn to meet the cost of the long-running planning dispute, and another 100,000 was used to meet the cost of external consultants in terms of development management service. So just turning to the first, is there an end point to this long-running planning dispute? Because these are not trivial sums, and it implies that there's no set date until such time, presumably, as the property is disposed of. Could you just update us on that?
Well, in terms of the settling the amounts outstanding, then yes, we have an order for sale on this property. I have to be careful with my wording. That's a legal correct term, we have an order for sale. And we are in the process of selling it, it's in the market, and we're looking at various routes that we can go down to get it there. Obviously the market did go down a great deal since May when we took possession, And it's also the case that because the courts are very careful around reducing the ability to make an offer on the property, because of course we have a strong obligation to make sure we get the best value on it for the sake of the freehold owners. So it is a bit slower than that. But yes, it's in order, but obviously it's events that are outside of our control in terms of when somebody comes along to purchase it.
If I may, Chairman, just a follow-up. So, are we confident that we are able to recover the money spent so far on the basis of the sale of the property?
The simple answer to that is no. We're at the stage now where the costs that are accruing, we don't think we'll be able to get back. So the total amount that's outstanding is in excess of what we think we'll get back on the house. And of course, this is the key point for this paper as well. We're still accruing costs now that we won't be getting back, and they're still substantial. And we need to put it to bed, I think, for the sake of our being able to settle our liability and to be able to think about the future.
I understand. And just as a follow-up, Chair, to the my initial question, perhaps on a brighter note, are we no longer anticipating being reliant on external consultants in terms of the development management service?
I believe, we're completely fully staffed now within the planning section, and shouldn't need any more. We're not currently employing them. Thank you.
Mandy.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. I have a number of questions, so bear with. Hopefully that's all right. I'll plough through. And my first question was again around that order for sale. I was really surprised that external audit suggested that we recognise the income related to monies owed where we have an order for sale. So they're asking us to put the income in, even though we might or might not get it, and we've got a lot sort of offsetting it. Can I just try and understand that thinking, because I'm struggling a little.
Yeah, well, that has been a subject of some debate with the auditors, whether it should be an asset held for sale or how it should be treated. And this is within the draft accounts, this is the position that's been reached at the moment. So we've raised an invoice effectively for it, and as soon as you raise an invoice, the income is recognised. Whether or not that invoice is going to be paid or not is another matter. So what we have done is all of the monies owed is recognised as income, but we've also put in a bad debt provision as well. And we haven't normally had a bad debt provision, but for that difference between how much we think we might get back and what our total amount outstanding is, there's a bad debt provision to reduce that down. But of course, we're very careful. Normally when you raise an invoice, you can spend the income, but of course in this instance, it wouldn't be the prudent thing to do. So we've set aside that money within reserve, and we can continue to revisit it. And there may have to be further bad debt provisions in future.
Thank you. That's a really unfamiliar way to me of dealing with it, but I have to go with that's what the advice is. I'm just picking up next question really is around Francis raised a few issues around small amounts, and then we said we ought to look at big amounts. For me, if we need to make savings, and we obviously do, it's actually about culture, and small amounts matter just like big amounts do, because the small amounts, lots of them, add up to the larger amounts. So I'm really keen that moving forward, all amounts are looked at, and everything that's a saving should be considered a saving, large or small. They all help with the position. And in my experience, the longer you have to plan for it, the better your decisions can be. If you wait until it's upon you, then suddenly you're in a position where lots of things need to happen at once. So just question then going around the budget monitoring. We've gone to 2 monthly, which I have struggled to figure out whether we're doing okay or not on a 2 monthly report. When are the other reports going to come? Because I'm in the quarterly, half-yearly, 3-quarter mindset, and I'm just wondering, that's month 2, where the rest's going to come from. I'm struggling with that a little.
Well, it's quarterly. We're obliged to report on a quarterly basis, but often, but for us, it makes more sense to give you month 2 information to bring into the reports now, because in terms of the timetable for the corporate plan and the draft statement of accounts and all those other things, it makes sense to bring it in July, but we can't give you month 3 data in July because the month is only just finished. So in reality, we give you month 2 information in order to so you're still getting those quarterly reports effectively, but they're just not done on that quarter. But it still gives the opportunity to highlight any issues that have arisen.
So when will the next one be due? That's my...
That goes back to revised then. So when we set the revised budget in November, you have month 6 information then to look to. And when we set the forward budget, we now also refer to month 9 financial information as well.
Thank you, because good budget monitoring is really key, as you know, especially if there's pressure on the budget. So my next question was, there were several overspends within the report. Some were under, some were over. Are those overspends in the areas, and they're not massive, but they are those all sort of looked at? Because again, controlling those is just as important. That all could add to a potential saving. So has that all been looked at?
Yes, the LT is looked on a service-by-service basis. I've looked at on a service-by-service basis in terms of the outturn for the year, and it gives us an opportunity to look at the true story, because often this is after the use of reserves as well, so it could well be the fact that actually there's been some use, so what appears to be an overspend is actually just an item of spend falling to the revenue budget, even though we perhaps could have funded it from a reserve instead. So it's the absence of reserve funding as well as the actuality of reserve spending that's appearing within the actual report.
Thank you. A very quick question. Salix is in the report. Was that a grant or a loan, and was there sort of a match fund there? And that's probably been in previous papers, so apologies for the question.
No, that was a grant. We don't have any loans, so yes, that was absolutely a grant that was received for increased carbonisation.
Thank you. I know Salix offer a range of different support, so thank you. Good news that it was a grant. And my last one's just around the capital section here. So you've got the capital figures, and then you've got a little bit at the end that are all sort of slightly separate, and I'm just trying to understand whether they were funded by the revenue budget or whether they're from the capital, and if they are from the revenue, then why they appeared in that capital section. It's just that little bit at the end I wanted clarity on. Thank you.
No, they've all been funded from revenue. I only refer to it in the capital section because they're things that people might consider as alongside capital type schemes. So that it feels like a capital scheme, even though it wasn't actually capitalised for accounting purposes.
Fabulous. Thank you for forbearance, Chair.
Thank you. Ethan.
Yes, I agree with Mandy that there is a cultural need to be prudent, and we as members set that culture, we help with that culture, and then we trust the staff to make those small decisions. We don't have a good recent record at making the big important decisions. We've been prevaricating, and what I would hate to see is that we then become involved in small decisions, which becomes a kind of displacement activity and another reason for not making the big decisions. So yes, let's get the culture right. We need tweaks, but then let's set the staff at making those small decisions and trust them. Let's get on with the big picture.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. And I know myself I'm good at distraction things in my own life, so it's very easy to get distracted by small things. Thank you. It's good intervention. Thank you. Oh, Gordon, just got to come back.
One response to what John said. When we are talking about the 440 saving our bacon and the situation we'd have been without that, I think it's worth bearing in mind that it was one-off pressures that arose in the last financial year that caused the strain. It wasn't ongoing budget, and I think it would be a different situation entirely for me to be handing over to if there was an ongoing problem that needed to be financed. It was, of course, the one-offs that arose with the long-running planning disputes and the consultants in development management that caused the issues. And I think there is an important difference conceptually in terms of our financial health.
Thank you. I can see no other hands raised, and we've got 6 recommendations here. I want to add a 7th with your forbearance. So I'd like us to, at 7, to endorse the points in 8.6, and this is part of this changing of the culture, if we're all happy with that. But I would like somebody to propose that. Thank you. Evelyn, happy to second? Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. Judy, can you just add in that final point? Thank you. Right. Moving on to item 11 is the annual Treasury Management Report, and
Can I just add, there's a second section within 10.2 as well. Can I just refer to
Oh
that?
gosh,
The
yes,
draft
so there is
accounts?
the outturn. Yes, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So I'll keep this brief. But the draft accounts has now been published, and public inspection has commenced. So you'll find there the full draft accounts. In essence, early on there's the narrative report, and that takes you through some key highlights in terms of the performance indicators and in terms of key outcomes for the year. Then you get the primary financial statements. And I think in terms of the primary financial statements, the one thing I will draw your attention to, there's been a large fall in the pensions fund deficit of 10 million. So it sounds quite exciting. In reality, it's not that relevant, unfortunately, but it does make the balance sheet look a lot better. That's all. So then, and after the primary financial statements, there's the notes to the accounts. So these are familiar. There's no structural changes to the accounts, and there's not many technical changes to draw your attention to. So the notes to the account look as they have done previously. There's a new section on provisions because we've set aside the provision for the long-running planning case that we haven't had in previous years. Other than that, and of course at the end you have the annual governance statement, which the Devon Audit Partnership referred to, which is an annual review of governance of the year, and that has been through the standards committee as well.
Any questions for Gordon? Bill?
Thank you, Chairman. Why have debtors gone up by 800,000 in a year? Probably it's a simple explanation.
No, that is a big jump up for us. But yeah, no, that's just to do with the way that debts have fallen this year. So partly some of that is the 400,000 related to the long-running planning dispute. That's the single largest item as well. But it's also just the fact that there are some large. I mean, the RPA is a big challenge for us in terms of getting. The Rural Payments Agency, in terms of when we get funding in, so that explains a lot of our debtors.
Okay, I've also been told by a tenant that some rents haven't been either demanded or paid for 18 months. I'm just wondering if they would appear in there as well.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
No, I'll follow that up.
Okay, if you could, thank you.
All of the debtors will be in there that will reflect income that we due. Sometimes there are situations where there are conversations or negotiations going on where we're not able to formally raise an invoice, but there will still be income related to those that reflects in the accounts.
Okay, thank you.
Mandy?
Thank you. Just coming back quickly to the major shift there around the actuarial losses. It does sort of skew the whole set of accounts because it's a massive figure within them. My understanding was when it was last looked at, actually our life expectancy was dropping slightly, I think, compared to previous actuarial reviews. But I'm just wondering why it's such a massive shift percentage-wise. Is it that it's been a big shift in those ages, or I'm not sure when the last actuarial review undertook, because it seems a big move for me, figure-wise.
Yeah, it's very large. It's mostly related to financial assumptions contained within it rather than changes to longevity. And I believe it's all to do with gilt yields and discount rates. That's the primary factor. So obviously, in recent times, you've gone from 0.1% base rates to 5% base rates, and that makes a huge difference to estimating the cost of future incomes, of future pensions.
Thank you. Of course, at the moment, our interest rates aren't rising at the same level as borrowing, so it'd be really interesting to look at the next review and see how that plays out. Thank you.
Members, any further questions? In which case, we've been asked to consider and note the statement of accounts 22-23. Could I have a proposal, please? She's looking around there. John, thank you. And Jeremy, happy to second? All those in favour? Thank you. Right, we now will move on to item 11, and Gordon, it's the annual Treasury Management Report.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is our opportunity. There are three opportunities in the year when we have to refer to Treasury Management. It's when we set the policy, when we look to see that we're complying with the policy, and at the end of the year when we showed our compliance with the policy. So this just shows that how we manage our cash, and I can reassure you all that how we manage our cash is compliant with the policies that we established back in March 2022. We have an arrangement with Somerset Council to manage our funds. The only thing to draw your attention is that the comm fund as a vehicle no longer exists, but it's still the case that effectively the same relationship and the same counterparty risks exists with Somerset Council as it did with Somerset County Council. They still invest our money for us, and they still provide a professional service at a very good rate. So I think those are the key points, Chair, from Treasury Management.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to have to borrow paper again. I'm really struggling here. Sorry. I'm absolutely going to skip. Sorry. My laptop. I can't cope any longer. So we are recommended to note the Treasury Management outturn for 22-23. If there's no questions, could I have a close? Oh, Mandy, did you have a question?
Can I just say thanks for the report, actually, because for me it's one of the most interesting reads of the year, always the Treasury report, and certainly that economic background I think is really valuable for us all to read. So I don't like a report to pass without comment, and I think just to acknowledge the work that's gone behind it and to say thank you.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to do. So can I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Evelyn. And a seconder? Thank you, Mandy. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you.
When you get to the rude bits I've written about you, I'll just put them on.
I've got the microphone on, by the way. So, we're now moving on to item 12, which is the Members' Allowances Scheme. Can you take this, Gordon?
Yeah, this is me as well.
I will get my own paper copy for the next meeting. I'm so sorry about this. Right, item 12.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our opportunity to report back on aggregate on the members' expenses that were paid, and it's an important part of governance and reporting back to members of the public. Members will be aware that we have a policy that the increase to allowances reflects that given to staff. So, and 1.2 details that the effective pay award for staff and members was 4.04, so that was what the members' allowances were increased by, and that's special responsibility as well as basic allowances. The table further on in the appendix shows the complete list, so that's of all the payments made over the course of 22-23. And the same caveats apply this time as to the last couple of years, where we can't be sure that we've picked up on all of the meetings you've attended as Exmoor National Park Authority members, because there's lots of hybrid and remote meetings that take place that we may not know about. Where we know of them, then we have reflected those in the table. But that's the information. That's just another implementation of policy agreed by the authority, Chair.
Thank you. Well, we do this every year, so I think we're quite familiar with it. For the new members, it's a nice learning curve, or development opportunity, as they say. So, can I have a proposal? As I can see no hands raised. Thank you, Mike. And a seconder, please. Thank you, Susan. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Members, I propose that we have a 10-minute break until 11 a.m. Just for those who are not familiar with me chairing meetings, I will be starting the meeting at 11. The Chief Executive is the person that we're going to look at, walking back now. So, item 13, please, members, the Corporate Plan Annual Report. Claire.
Thank you very much. Good morning, members. So I'm going to just do a little presentation on the achievements from the last year, just to highlight some of the things that the authority has been doing over the last year. Obviously, you have the report which contains the full record of activities. I can't go through all of that, but we did think it's always nice just to give a bit of a flavour of some of the things that have been done. So just in terms of the context, as you're aware, we set our corporate plan using the framework in the partnership plan. So what we as an authority are doing to achieve that wider partnership plan ambitions. Obviously, we've had to reflect on what's happening nationally with the government's response to the landscapes review consultation, a lot of policy changes that are happening at the moment, and what's been set out in terms of the priorities for protected landscapes from DEFRA, so that's climate and nature and people and place. I think it's obviously important to highlight that delivery of some of the action has been limited by budgets and staff capacity, but even so, I think you'll see from the report there's some really significant achievements. So in the plan for 22-23, we set out our priorities in delivering national park purposes, and this is reflecting the two sort of key priorities that government, the DEFRA, have set up. So in terms of people and place, connecting people with Exmoor special qualities, particularly new audiences, and finding new ways to engage with people, and excuse me, on nature and climate, so responding to the climate emergency as a core element of everything we do, and delivering the nature recovery vision as part of wider work, particularly around local nature recovery strategies. So, sorry about the size of the wording here, but there was a lot to get on one slide. So again, in the corporate plan, we set out particularly in what we wanted to do to achieve this. So this was using our estate as an exemplar to deliver government priorities, to ensure a great welcome for a diverse range of visitors, working with farmers on the Farming and Protected Landscapes programme, working with other national park authorities on joint working, growing our income base and external funding, and monitoring what we do in relation to the Partnership Plan and State of Park report. And also reflecting, of course, that we continue to deliver high quality services, so around our Rights of Way network, our education and outreach service, the planning service, assisting sort of businesses through our Rural Enterprise Exmoor work, and also developing our staff team. So that's what we set out in the corporate plan, along with a whole long list of specific actions, which the report does go through each one and give you an update. And I'm just going to now run through a few highlights. So firstly, in terms of the sort of the national working, I think particularly we wanted to flag up the Exmoor hosting two major conferences. So both the UK National Parks Conference, which we had a really interesting and stimulating a few days, some great study tours, some great speakers, lots of good discussions, thinking about what does the nation need for our national parks today, and also it was great to see that our Exmoor Young Rangers, two of them came along to that event and participated and spoke there. So that was brilliant. We also hosted the Society of National Park Staff Conference at Nesselcombe, which again we had over 70 representatives across all national parks attending that. Again, really great way of staff getting together, learning from each other, highlighting, sort of talking about common issues, some great study tours, and also an introduction to other national parks to the bowling competition, which was great fun and everyone really enjoyed. On the climate action, particularly wanted to highlight the work that's been done at Pinkery. So we have our new biomass boiler at Pinkery now, so part of the overall ambition to ensure that Pinkery can be net zero, but also self-reliant on renewable energy. That's where we're aiming to go. And also we've started the greening of our fleet through purchase of 2 electric vehicles, so the minibus that you can see there, and also replacement of one of the pool cars. So a good progress in relation to our climate action plan. And Appendix 2 of the report does give you the full details of how we are moving forward on that. I think we would expect to see some hopefully some changes in our emissions next year as a result of some of these measures that we've introduced. In terms of the sort of external funding, I think we do have to recognise that we don't have a dedicated external funding officer anymore, so that is one of the impacts of some of the budgetary constraints that we're under. But having said that, we have been very pleased to be successful with the Heritage Lottery, National Heritage Lottery Fund bid of 1.4 million around Exmoor Pioneers. So we'll be hearing lots more around that, of course. We were less successful in terms of the landscape recovery bid for the coastal woodland project, but that is being taken forward in other ways in terms of projects to promote the history and management of coastal woodlands, and also working with the National Trust on their landscape recovery projects. Although that bid wasn't successful, other things are happening around that. In terms of Caremore donations, excluding the large one-off legacy that we received, the donations are down on last year, but I think again that's probably due to not having the staff capacity to push it so strongly, maybe a bit of a reduction in people's ability to give because of cost of living, and we didn't launch any new appeals. We focused on the Woods and Trees appeal. But again, work's been put in place to help strengthen this in the future, and we've got the new online giving platform, so we are feeling positive that that is something that hopefully will improve in future. Also wanted to highlight the work that's been done in terms of the National Park Centre improvements, so a bit of a facelift to some of the centres, and also a change to the way that the centres are laid out and the displays and so on, and that's already showing some benefits in terms of visitor numbers being up and also overall spend, and some really positive feedback, so good to see that that's bearing fruit. In relation to our rights of way network, we achieved our highest ever score of 99% of the rights of way assessed as open and easy to use, which is brilliant and real testament to the team that are working on that, particularly as they're also dealing with a lot of storm damage. Also, I haven't highlighted it here, but it's in the report. There's also some really good work that's been done with a bit of DEFRA funding that we received in terms of improving disabled access. So there's been some work done on the Exmoor Strolls, which is promoting accessible routes, and also developing some information resources for those who are neurodiverse, so helping them to prepare for what to expect if they come to Exmoor. I think although that's brilliant, I think we do also need to reflect that obviously this is an area, a service that we've had to look at very carefully in terms of our budgets, and that has had an impact on what the team have been able to achieve. So we've flagged up where path inspections have dropped, although hopefully the Path Watcher volunteer programme will help minimise any impacts. There was a bit of a pause on Great Bradley Bridge. The work there whilst it was decided whether we were keeping the rights of way function or not. Now that has been determined, then work has restarted on the project, so that is going to be taken forward, or is being taken forward. We haven't unfortunately been able to progress the family-friendly cycle trails. We didn't recruit a project officer, and because staff reduction in the team, there hasn't really been capacity to do that. And similarly, the public path order work, the diversions and so on, is being reduced because of reduced capacity. So, we will sort of see, we are starting to see, and we'll continue to see some impacts in terms of the service because of the budget cuts there. Moving on to look at Farming in Protected Landscapes programme. This has been very successful in terms of being fully, all the money being fully allocated, and a number of projects identified and spent. So a whole range of things that have been delivered through this around habitat improvements, orchard and hedgerow planting, regenerative farming, conservation of historic assets, and so on. So I think that's been very well received as well within Exmoor. On the education and outreach, just wanted to pick out some new engagement with new audiences that's being done, also sort of helping to contribute to health and wellbeing. So there are Welcome to Exmoor Days for older people suffering from loneliness, isolation and low confidence, and also the Communities for Nature Activity Days on North Hill, which are attracting increasing volunteers from the Minehead area, including those who are struggling with various challenges in their lives at the moment. So very positive things, both from an outreach and a health and wellbeing perspective. And then corporately, we've done a number of, working on a number of corporate plans and strategies. So as you know, the work on the partnership plan review has begun. We've completed the State of Park report, and we're engaging with our partnership groups on that. The estate strategy was completed and adopted by members, and work is progressing on the equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. So we have a task group set up on that with members and staff. We've had a meeting, we've developed a draft strategy, another meeting being set up. So things going forward on that as well, which is very positive, obviously looking across the work that we do. And then on the planning service,
we completed the 5-year review of the local plan, and work on a new design guide is underway. The timetable for that is slipping though because of, again, staff capacity, so we're sort of moving forward with that as fast as we can, but not as fast as was hoped originally. In terms of the DM, Development Management Planning Service, performance was above targets, the national targets for minor and majors, but slightly below for other developments, and again reflecting on staffing pressures throughout the year and the sort of turnover, use of consultants, etc. But as was mentioned earlier, the team is now complete, so that's a really positive thing to report on. And one specific action, which was around updating the local list requirements for validating planning applications, that's not been able to be progressed, but is now being taken forward this current year. And finally, in terms of, again, sorry about the small wording on the screen, but looking at our organisational development, we are working on the organisational development strategy. This is picking up what came out of our staff survey and workshops that were held by an independent consultant with staff. So we're developing a draft strategy and action plan to respond to that. The employee profile in Appendix 3 shows similar core staffing levels from previous years, but a bit of a drop in seasonal and project staff, again as you would expect in terms of budgetary constraints. One of the things it does flag up is that we have quite a high proportion of core staff who are over 45, so that's great, and that provides a experienced workforce. But in terms of workforce planning, it does create a potential future risk if those experienced staff then do all look to retire or leave the authority at a similar time. So just flagging that up. The gender profile by grade continues to show a bit of an imbalance in higher grades, but generally across the authority our gender pay gap is 0%, so that's positive as well. We also have experienced similar trends to the public sector nationally, with difficulties finding the staff required, which also means increasing pressure on existing staff to cover vacant roles, so that's something just to watch. Sickness levels similar to previously, but the number of occasions of sickness absence has been higher, largely linked to sort of ongoing things with flu and COVID and colds. And we've had a bit of an increase in long-term sickness absence as well. On the positive side though, we've had no staff or volunteer accidents or withdrawal reports. And complaints, number of formal complaints is, well, we've had none, so very low. We did have one referred to the Ombudsman, but he determined not to, or they determined not to investigate, so that again was positive. And we've dealt with 37 freedom of information and environmental information regulation requests. All of that is in the public domain and on our website. So that was a quick whip through, and happy to take any comments or questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, over to you. Andy.
Thank you. Just a couple of things to pick up. First one was on Pinkery. On the graph within the paper in one of the appendices, there's no target in place for 21-22 or 22-23. I'm just wondering if there's a reason for that. That's the first question. Yeah, so we didn't set targets as a result of the COVID pandemic. There were targets previous to that, but obviously that had a significant impact on the ability to deliver residential stays. But it has been agreed that we will look to reset those targets. Thank you. Because on a positive note, if you look at actually the schools and groups, that seems to be a sort of rising trend. Given the investment, it'd be good to get some income to offset that moving forward. And just picking up again on the sort of gender gap, I was just looking at the higher levels within the authority, and I looked at HIJ and L, the uppermost levels. And I think 3 women, 9 men, so it is quite an imbalance. So I just noted that, which you made reference to. But probably of more of a concern is those under 34s. The figures seem low, and I was just concerned, but understand we've had no internships, which will reflect in those figures? You know, is there a plan? I know it's capacity and training issues, but is there a plan moving forward to look at some internships just to help address that balance?
Yeah. So yes, certainly. Again, you know, that's partly been impacted by COVID and our ability to do that and budgets, but we are keen to relook at the opportunities for that. The funding for Exmoor Pioneers gives us an opportunity to look at interns and apprenticeships as well, not just within the authority but more widely across other organisations. So it's definitely something we would like to try and restart again. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that'd be really welcome, and I think, you know, for me it'd be a fantastic place to work if you're local. It's certainly something you're passionate about. So some great opportunities for young people potentially.
Yeah, it's a great report, and I think just, you know, reflecting on the difficulties that, you know, in terms of looking after budget and resources, what we're delivering is fantastic. So it's a huge thank you for the report and all of the work. So a couple of quick things. So in terms of, it is minor, but I was just interested in terms of the sickness thing, and you mentioned an increase in long-term sickness, and I just wondered, is that, I suppose my question was around, is that kind of sort of COVID related, which would be understandable, but I was just slightly, I suppose not concerned, but just aware of, you know, people work under a lot of pressure in difficult financial environment and uncertainty. I just wondered in terms of the general morale and how people feel, and is that linked to longer-term sickness, or is that more of a COVID-y thing, or is that, they all kind of, I know it all interlinks, but I was just interested, I suppose, the bottom line about morale and well-being overall in a difficult and ongoingly difficult time.
I think Ellie would like to say something as well, but I'll just respond initially to that. Ellie, do you want to come forward? So some of it is related to, you know, long COVID and those sorts of things. But I think there are also people who have, you know, sicknesses which are long-going and, you know, not related at all. But I think, you know, yes, definitely we are aware, and we've, you know, been sort of discussing that there is pressure on the staff team. Understandably, we've gone through quite a unsettling few years, you know, with COVID and with, you know, the budgetary constraints and so on. So, you know, it is something that I think we do need to be mindful of, and that's partly why we have the organisational development work going on, just to make sure that, you know, we are engaging closely with staff and making sure we're picking up where we need to, any further actions that can help support and, help staff through those changes. Ellie, would you like to say anything further?
Yeah, I was just going to add that we monitor sickness very closely because we're such a small organisation. Oh, that's what I had.
I thought you sounded all right.
Yep. Sorry. So yeah, in terms of sickness absence, because we're such a small organisation, it's very closely monitored, and sickness forms are, you know, eventually returned to me, and I do check the return to work area. And if I do see something that hasn't perhaps been noticed by a manager, I would flag that up. In terms of the long-term sickness absence, we supported that employee in terms of occupational health and a phased return to work, and we managed that way. So does that answer your question?
Ellie, could you outline about the staff surveys that you do?
Yeah, so we did the staff surveys a couple of years ago, about a year ago, and the staff workshops. We intend to do another survey as part of the review of the organisational development strategy when that's implemented. So I think just to see where we can see those improvements and better responses perhaps.
Thank you. Any other questions? Dominic.
Thank you. Yeah, very interesting report as always. A couple of things not entirely related to each other, but just a small point on the list of requirements for validating planning. It seems to me that it's kind of a false economy not to update that if it means that people are submitting planning applications with the incorrect information, and then you have a to and fro with Chloe to try and, you know, get those applications correct. So that seems a bit surprising. and I suspect this also might relate to the biodiversity net gain conversation we're going to have later as well, where that's throwing up new requirements that are not currently on the website, are not explained to applicants. And declaration of interest here, I know this because I put an application in. And actually, which is an interesting thing I think we should all do, because that, even if you don't mean it, because it's actually a good way to do a walkthrough of the process. Actually, putting ourselves in the shoes of the people who live in Exmoor who have to go through this is actually quite a good idea. So I recommend it thoroughly. So that's one thing, that seems to be a false economy. Moving on to other issues, the nature recovery vision. You mentioned in the report here that a revised draft has been consulted on with representatives of the local farming community, is now in the final stages of editing before publication. It would be, maybe not now, but at some point it would be good to know when that's coming back or being circulated for us. Having it commented on by the local farming community, of course, that's one important stakeholder in the nature recovery vision. There are others. And there are other voices that maybe might have been heard, but it could be that they're already happy with it and therefore it's not a problem. You can probably tell my concern is that if something's been done to water down that vision, then obviously that would need to come back here for us to talk about that. And connected partially to that is FIPL, the Farming in Protected Landscapes. As a member of the panel, we had a really interesting discussion recently in our recent meeting, looking at the last couple of years and seeing what we should be doing for the next few years. If the funding continues, and what's interesting about that is that we acknowledge we're not yet connecting that to the nature recovery vision. We're not yet connecting FIPL to the wider purposes of what we're trying to do in the corporate plan or what we're trying to do in the park, and that's a missed opportunity. It's happening, but it's happening, if you like, almost accidentally, just as a result of the fact that if we hand out money to people to do things in landscape, some of it will be good for nature. But DEFRA have now come back and have sort of said they now want to see more innovation, less just paying for fences and wire and stakes, which is where £200,000 of the money's gone so far, and more in innovation. Now, I know from previous experience with DEFRA, when they say innovation, if you then come to them with an innovative idea, they throw up their hands in horror and say, we can't possibly do that, it hasn't been done before. So that we've always got to be aware of the use of the word innovation in this context. Nonetheless, there are things we could be better at doing, at connecting this to the nature recovery vision and having a more holistic view about what should be happening in landscapes in a protected area. So hopefully that's something we can look at soon. Thank you.
I'd agree with Dominic's last point, but not his first point. You really don't have to put in a planning application unless you have to. So I would not encourage it otherwise. Just in terms of item 13, appendix 7, looking at the conservation of the natural environment is interesting. When you look at percentage of SSSI, sites of special scientific interest, in favourable condition in Exmoor under our management, it's only 3%. But scroll down to the next table on page 3, percentage of SSSI land in unfavourable but recovering condition, Exmoor 96%. So that seems to be a success story. Perhaps you can comment or not. I'd appreciate your comments.
Yes, it's a difficult one, and I apologize. I didn't explain this appendix in my introduction. So just to sort of set the context for this, in one of the auditors' reports, they suggested that we should, as an improvement recommendation, set some benchmark indicators, and because we, as a National Park family, were reporting to DEFRA on this range of indicators, that seemed to be a sensible way to go. So that's what's being presented to you here. On the SSSIs, I think I would just sort of, it is as you say, the figures are as you say, but I would put a word of caution to that, in that those haven't changed in over 10 years, those figures, because the monitoring has not been done. So as Natural England experienced budgetary cuts along with lots of public sector, there hasn't been an update in that monitoring. We are going to work with Natural England over the next year or so to get some updated monitoring done on the moorland SSSI, so we will be able to, show hopefully some change in that respect. But I think the reason that there's so much is in unfavourable recovering is that because it's in some kind of agri-environment scheme, so it's considered to be in positive management. But I think you would just have to put a few caveats there around how we look at that information and hope that in a year or so's time we have actually some better data to use. And obviously on our own estate we are now doing much more detailed surveys and assessments, so we will know much better on our own land what the condition is going to be, but that's not reflected in this table here.
That's interesting. I mean, it goes to the heart of our statutory purposes, so it's quite an important indicator, and it'd be useful to get some reliable, updated information on that in due course. Thank you.
And well, just finally to say on that, obviously there are also a lot of discussions going on at the moment around how special scientific interest have been designated, the features for which they were designated, and how those are changing for reasons that are out with our control, for example climate change, and therefore we may need to look again at those reasons for designation, and that's an ongoing discussion with Natural England as well.
Thank you. Robin.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, it was around the nature recovery vision stuff, and probably around this as well. What impact is the developing local nature recovery strategy going to have that the county councils are pulling together? I do know Devon Local Nature Partnership had considered this at length yesterday, having just been awarded £388,000 over the next 2 years to develop their local nature recovery strategy. And of course there's a chunk of Devon is going to be under that, where although we're not going to be a responsible authority, we're going to be one of the consulted ones, aren't we? I don't know what Somerset's budget is, but I assume that theirs was also announced on last Friday as well, because everybody's was, so maybe a Somerset member can enlighten me in a moment. How is that likely to impact, and how are we working with them to ensure that whatever is developed in the local nature recovery strategy is going to mesh with what we've got in our nature recovery vision? I know we'll have a direct link, because I have a sneaking feeling that the lead environment member at Devon County Council may well be invited onto the Devon Local Nature Partnership Board.
I think she's a bit busy.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Very, very good comment. Thank you. So Alex Ferris, our Conservation Manager, has been working with the two local nature partnerships to try and ensure that, obviously because we are split between the two counties, that what happens in relation to those local nature recovery strategies does tie up across Exmoor, and it is linked to our nature recovery vision. So I think it's probably fair to say that it's early days yet in terms of the development of the strategies, but he has been working with them on some of the data and the mapping that we've done for Exmoor to feed into the work of those two partnerships. So I think definitely we see this as very important that we do engage, and that we try and make sure that those wider nature recovery strategies do align with what we've developed for Exmoor. And I think having the nature recovery vision obviously puts us in a really strong position in that we do have that. And just to go back to Dominic, I didn't answer your question about the changes. My understanding, and Rob will correct me if I'm wrong here, is that my understanding is that there's no change to the actual targets or the ambition in the nature recovery vision. It's more the way that it's presented and communicated, and recognising the role of the farming community in helping to deliver that. So that is what's been done, and I think obviously if there were any changes we would be sort of coming back to members, but we're not anticipating that is going to be necessary. Yeah.
Thank you. So I've got Fran and then Jeremy Holton.
Thank you, Andrea. Appendix 6 regarding the National Park Centre visitor numbers and income trend. I was wondering if you have a breakdown of the types of spend that has been taken at the centres. I'm pleased to see that the income is improving, but do you know the type of, is it books, is it ice cream, is it soft toys, all the different things? Do you have that? So that was one question. And my other question was regard to freedom of information, we've had 37 requests. Now, are they from 37 individuals, or are sometimes groups asking asking for freedom of information on different types of items within the national park? And is it repeat freedom of information requests from groups of people? Thank you.
So on the types of spend, I don't have those figures to hand, I'm sorry. I think probably Dan James, the Royal Enterprise Exmoor Manager, would have that, and I can ask him and come back to you if that's okay. But certainly I know there's been a lot of work that's been put into developing the sort of the stock of what is stocked in the national park centres to improve spend, and that does seem to be working really well. But I'll see if I can get that information to feed back to you. On the FOIs, yes, the report that's given there does list all the sort of the individual FOIs. We have a web page with all of them that are disclosed on the website. So if we get repeats of the same request, we will just direct people to any, if information is already available on the website, we will direct them to that publicly available information. We have had, I think, again looking at Hazel to confirm here, we've had one experience of sort of a bit of a campaign around a particular issue, whereby again we just point people to where the information is held.
Thank you. Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Can I go back to Appendix 7 and endorse the non-inspection of triple SIs from personal experience? But what I really wanted to talk about was the water courses, and wondering if we are just hostages of fortune to the water authorities, bearing in mind that I only found out from the national press that our sewage works at Paracan was the worst offending sewage works in the southwest of England, and bearing in mind that goes into the River Hedon, which goes through triple SIs and down to a honeypot beach. What do we have by way of influence on how these things are sorted out? And do we have any contact with the water boards? And basically, how can we get ourselves up the list if these things are happening? Thank you.
Is that best if I ask Rob to answer that, please?
I mean, I can give it a go. I think this is a difficult one for us in that we don't have any particular role or expertise in relation to this. Obviously, where it does impact on quality of triple SIs, etc., we may have some involvement, but we have, through the partnership plan, it is one of the things that I've sort of flagged up with our partners, including the Environment Agency, and we have the Exmoor Rivers and Streams group as well, who are obviously very active around water quality. So I think it's a fair question to ask, and it's something that we should be perhaps asking more strongly of some of our partners to come and talk to us about what the causes of that are and what actions are being undertaken. And certainly for the partnership plan, when we're talking about targets, one of the national targets that possibly will be cascaded down to us for the partnership plan is around water quality. So I would expect that to be something that we should be looking at and including in the partnership plan. But Bob, is there anything else that we could say at this stage?
I think you've covered it basically, Claire, but I'd just say that when we ran the headwaters of the X project, we did quite a lot of water quality monitoring with that, under that project. But basically, Claire is right, we don't have specific powers. In terms of on our own estate, we are interested in water quality, obviously, and quantity, and we are looking currently at various natural flood management measures to address that, and also some of the riverside planting, particularly in the area around Simsbath, will look at water quality, won't it? Because it will basically have some effect on sort of diffuse pollution in the water bodies, but we are very limited in that regard, I would say. I don't know if Sarah has anything to add to that.
Before people cancel their visits to Heddon's Mouth, I'd just like to inform you that Harricombe Sewage Works is being rebuilt at the moment. Unfortunately, they built the retaining tanks the wrong size, I understand, so they've had to start again, but it will be done as soon as possible. Thank you.
I think we're all very relieved to hear that. We all went into panic mode there, I think, a bit. Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There is a huge amount here. It is really welcome and lovely to see. And people have talked about lots of things. Tiny thing from me, I was really excited and taken by your Exmoor Sensory stories. I've just found them on the web, and I've sent them around to a number of people because I think that they matter, and that's great. So just point that one up. That's quite a chunk of the population, and it was something which came up at the, if you remember, the consultative a week or so ago, and I sent it to the chap who wrote it. And the other thing I wanted to say was how pleased I am to see the numbers going up and up at Pinkery. It's great. And I want to say this time with a school governor hat on, and I don't think I need to declare this as an interest, it's just how valuable the staff at the schools I'm involved in think it is for the children. And also for the staff, but really, really special. It also, I have to say, thank you very much, National Park. The booking at Pinkery at the beginning of this term meant that Ofsted had to go away from one of the schools and come back a month later, which gave them a month to know they were coming, which was great. But the numbers going up is great. These are, of course, local children locally at school, not all of whom know anything about Exmoor. And that came out in the Generation Exmoor curriculum visit that I joined with Exford School at the depot and the tree, that it was quite clear that Patrick Watsmaddle was saying that it's quite clear that some of the children do know absolutely what they're seeing. Quite a lot of them don't. So it's really important for populations here and absolutely for populations elsewhere, I know that we'd like to get children from elsewhere and schools from elsewhere. It's a really good work, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes.
I was just going to say, obviously we will pass on all the comments of members to all the teams, because I'm sat here fronting it, but it's very much all the staff who are delivering all of this. So thank you very much.
Evelyn was next.
We did have an excellent working relationship with South West Water, particularly with the Myers project, where we levered out a huge amount of funding, which also levered out money from other organisations. And I just think, with the concerns that everyone has at the moment about sewers and sewage treatment, and the likelihood that isolated populations may be at the end of the list for improvements, that maybe at the highest level in the organisation we should be looking at revisiting the relationship with South West Water to ensure that we can work together again in the future. It's one of the largest employers in the region. It has huge budgets compared to us, but also if we can find a way of working together, it's going to help our communities as well.
The Chief Executive has noted your comment. Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. There may be further discussion on this report, but we shouldn't let this report pass without noting the recreation management on Appendix 7, page 5. The percentage of total length of footpaths and other rights of way that were easy to use, 97%. And the user satisfaction as well. I think the staff and the authority should be congratulated. It's done really well in challenging times. And it's interesting to note as well that the total length of footpaths and other rights of way compared to Dartmoor, sort of 20% more, which is an interesting point in itself. So well done on staff for doing that, and it's interesting in terms of financial savings as well, that this is obviously a very appreciated resource of the National Park, and we're doing very well with that, so congratulations.
Thank you. I see no more hands. So we've been asked to note the progress in implementing the authority's key commitments in 22-23 and to delegate the Finance Performance Advisory Panel and Leadership Team further scrutiny of the authority performance. Could I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Evelyn. And a seconder? Thank you, Dominic. All those in favour? Excellent. Thank you very much. So moving on to item 14, I'm relieved to tell you we're only doing half of this today, because it can be quite a task. So this is to allow the new members, and one unnamed new member, as Robin's already highlighted, Secretariat member, to get used to us and what we do and the outside bodies and all those sort of things. But these are the statutory ones that we have to do. And we've all got it in our report. Claire.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. So as Andrea said, we are just looking at the appointments to the committees set out in the appendix. So final council committee, the expressions of interest as set out. Does not work? Sorry, I did push it. I'll start again then. So yeah, so this is, we are only doing the appointments to the statutory meetings. Okay, can you hear?
I can hear,
Yep.
yes, just whether you need the screen, that's it.
I'll put that up in a sec. Yeah. So the final accounts committee, as set out in the report, expressions of interest. That's fine. The standards committee, we do have more expressions of interest than we have places on the committee. Yep. So the expressions of interest are John Petrinos, Stephen Pugsley, and from the local authorities, Evelyn Stacey, Secretary of State of Appointment, and then 3 parish members, Mike Ellicott, Bill Gein, and Nick Thwaites. The suggestion is that we appoint the 2 local authority representatives, because we have to have at least 1 member from a local authority and 1 from the Secretary of State. So to enable a bit of resilience in case one of those local authority members can't attend, we suggest that those 2 are appointed, and also that Evelyn Stacey, as the only directly appointed Secretary of State member, is also appointed. And then we have the 3 parish members that we then elect 2 of those. So that's the suggestion, if members are happy to go on that basis.
Anybody got any comments about that process? No? Oh.
Only so I think that looks entirely appropriate. We've got to give her that set balance of members within the Standards Committee. So it's a matter of determining the election between the 3.
How do we do this, Nicola?
So the same process as before. Judy will go around with sheets of paper. If you could, Judy, are we writing 2?
Yes, so I'll give you 2 sheets.
2 sheets.
That's 1 name on each sheet.
So it's between Mike Ellicott, Bill Gein, and Nick Thwaites. Please write 2 names on 2 separate sheets of paper. Thank you.
No, I don't understand why it says 3 votes required. There's 3 on it.
Yeah, well, it's the question as to whether you were happy to just appoint the Secretary of State member. Yeah. Chair, can I ask that we just know who they are, because I don't know all of them. It'd be just nice to know. Right.
Okay, so how are you going to identify? Bill, Nick, and Mike, could you identify yourselves, please?
Yeah. Right, I'm Bill Gein.
Where?
I'm from Northampton.
Thank you.
I could be next place.
Dalton, Exmoor Bolton.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Dalton, Exmoor.
One name on each piece of paper, so you're voting for two people, one name on each piece of paper, please. Would someone at the back put the lights on again now, please? Thank you.
So that means if Chris can come with you, take us I'll talk to you after. So I'm assuming
Members, I'm very pleased to say we have a result for the Standards Committee, and I'd like to congratulate Bill and Mike on their election to that committee. Now, normally we have a Standards Committee following this meeting, but we haven't had an agenda and all the rest of it, and because it's such a long meeting today, that will now happen in November. So, the members of the Standards Committee, you've got a meeting in November. Don't ask me the date, please. Don't. Right, moving on. Exmoor Local Access Forum.
So again, Chair, we have 3 expressions of interest and 2 places. So again, we have 1 Secretary of State appointment, Dominic Elson, and 2 parish members expressing an interest, Andrew Bray, who isn't here, and Nick Thwaites. So on that basis, the proposal is, again, do you wish to have 1 Secretary of State appointment and 1 parish member, and have a vote between the 2 parish members? If you're content with that approach, then we would need to do another vote.
Robin?
Yes, again, I propose that that's the route we take, because in order to maintain that balance within our statutory committees.
Mandy?
Just ask a question. Can you have more? I'm just reticent if people new can't.
Not with the local access forum, that is one.
Okay, but the previous one, I'm just reticent if people are really interested to say no, thank you. That's all. So that was my question.
Standing Committee is the standing committee of the organisation, so we can't change the numbers now.
Only by changing our standing order.
We'd have to change, which the Standards Committee would have to do. Hey! So are we all happy with, we're going to, well, clearly we are, because Judy's handing out ballot papers.
Hang on, again, is that, looking at the piece of the screen up there, are we actually doing one vote? One vote?
Yes, so if you're happy with that proposal, we will have 1 vote between the 2 parish members. So 1 name, please, on your piece of paper, either Andrew Bray or Nick Thwaites. Andrew Bray or Nick Thwaites, please. So Andrew is not here, but he is parish member for North Courtney. Thank you.
He's not a member for there.
Oh, yes. Yes. So, as has been pointed out, the parish members are here for the whole of the national park. So that's just as context for you in terms of their.
So, for the Exmoor Local Access Forum, I'd very much like to congratulate Dominic and Nick on their appointments. Where's Dominic gone? I look up and a member's disappeared.
Were we voting for Dominic? No. Right, okay. Dominic was there. Dominic was there. Right, okay, so we
They are the two members that have been appointed. Okay. Moving on to the Exmoor Consultative and Parish Forum. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, for this one, we need to appoint a chairperson and deputy chairperson. So, again, if there are any nominations for that, thank you.
Stephen.
Could I nominate Mr. Alicos as the chairman of the forum? He has been an excellent chairman of the forum now for the last 4 years, and he does an extremely good job of making sure that the business of the forum gets done in an efficient manner, but also making sure that it's a very inclusive meeting and that people are encouraged to come and participate and to engage, which is of course what the forum is there to be. So I would like to propose Mr. Alicos.
I'm very happy to second that. Any other nominations? All in favour? Ah, unanimous. Brilliant. So we now need to appoint a deputy chairman. Robin.
I'd propose Andrew Bray, please.
Is there a second to Andrew? Jeremy. Any other nominations? All those in favour?
Is he prepared to
do it? I was going to say, yes. Does he know?
Well.
It's his own fault
Harsh.
if he doesn't come.
It's all about choices, Nick. All about choices. Thank you. Well, that was... So, moving on to something far more exciting and interesting. Item 15, implementing biodiversity net gain in Exmoor National Park, and I believe it's Claire indeed.
Thank you. Yes, members, so this is a report to you regarding the implementation of the biodiversity net gain requirement. This is a new national statutory requirement that is being introduced to ensure that rather than just sort of mitigating or avoiding impacts of development on biodiversity, that we actually leave the environment in a better state. So it's net gain, and the requirement is for all developments to achieve a 10% gain on the biodiversity value of the site or the development that is being taken place. So this is required and will be coming into law in November for certain developments. There is a smaller sites metric which is being introduced as of April next year, so slightly longer lead-in time for that. The report is in effect to two things. One is that we wish to trial implementation of the requirements just on a voluntary basis to help the authority in getting our sort of processes right for implementing this, but also for agents and applicants to help them understand what is involved as well. So we would like to start that trial from the 1st of August.
And secondly, to help applicants, we have put together, and all credit to Ali Coburn, who's sitting at the back there, our Wildlife Conservation Officer, who's really been leading this work. We've put together some technical guidance on how we would like to implement it in the national park. So although it is a statutory requirement, we do have policies in the local plan already around biodiversity enhancement, and we're really keen that all developments, irrespective of if they're large sites, small sites, or exempted, do also provide some benefit for biodiversity. So the recommendation is that members approve that technical guidance note, which is there to support applicants and officers in making decisions around this. Anything further?
Yeah, just very briefly to add on to that, at the end of the report you'll see that there has already been some informal discussions with planning agents through an agents forum we have, just to sort of start to get them used to the possibilities. I think it's fair to say, and Stephen was there at the time, it was relatively positively received. It was recognised it was something that was certainly coming eventually, and having that lead in to be able to exercise our processes and ensure that it's as efficient and as effective as we can possibly make it is helpful. Also running the guidance before the legislation comes into effect. There's still a lot of unknowns actually. There's still a lot of advice to come out. There's still secondary legislation that we're waiting for, and what it enables us to do is to again just sort of fine tune as we go along when the new pieces of legislation or those new pieces of guidance come out, to be able to ensure that from the 1st of November and certainly by April that we are ready to go across the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Andy?
Well, I read it from end to end, and first of all, I couldn't fully understand still, having read it, what it meant, so I'm sure if I'm feeling that, other members of the public might. I think a real explanation about exactly what it is would be helpful, but my question was, you're asking for a minimum 10% net gain, but I couldn't see how you worked out the baseline to add 10% on. So if I'm missing something, please enlighten me. It was an interesting read, but I feel I didn't fully understand it by the time I got to the end of it. View on reading.
Sorry, the technical issues going here. Dean, can you answer that?
So it's probably a difficult process to explain in the next 5 minutes. We've been working on it for a number of months, and as Claire said, Ali in particular has been leading on that. In terms of fundamentally what it is, it's about having a process where you identify your baseline data, so you identify what your biodiversity is on a given application site. So like you will do with sort of ecological appraisals, where you assess whether you've got hedgerows or you've got semi-improved grasslands or you've got veteran trees on the site, that will provide a baseline. And there is a metric that they're developing, and they are slowly changing over time, that basically, in its simplest form, gives you numbers. And what you do is you use that, and then as part of your proposal, you will need to then show that you are implementing other or similar or the same habitats that increase it 10%. So you're adding more value to what you need to do. And that's through baseline assessment, that's through biodiversity net gain plans, and that's through other matters. It's really important to understand that this is above and beyond what is the usual assessment against things like protected species. So you hear us as officers talk lots about, well, the impact that barn has got a species of bat in there. That isn't what this is about. This is something completely different and is above and beyond what we would normally ask for. So that's it in a very simple nutshell in terms of what biodiversity net gain is. Now, there's lots of very complicated bits feeding into it that we're working through, which is what this guidance is about. It's about allowing us to work through those processes to say, well, okay, what's the process for us agreeing the date for that baseline? What happens in the event that we find a site that has been sort of stripped before an application has been submitted? What do we do there? In particular, and talking to colleagues from other planning authorities, of particular interest is that post-decision. So you will have seen from the report that where we are securing that net gain, that needs to be secured for 30 years. What is the mechanisms for that? And what's the enforcement strategy around that? Who is doing the enforcement? Who is doing the monitoring? Who's paying for the monitoring? Who's paying for the resources to do what we need to do? And we're in a position at the moment where we sort of don't really know the implications to be able to go, well, this is what we need. Now, the government have turned around and given some initial funding to help with the setup, and that helps. But I know a number of authorities, including Exmoor, are nervous about the ongoing commitment this may provide. And so what this guidance does is it's starting that process for us to be able to quantify and understand the impact that it has on the authority. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. And my other question was, could you, like carbon, could you offset? So if you can't deliver it within where you are, could it be somewhere else? I'm just thinking if there was an infill with very few trees and hedgerows.
Oh, sorry.
I was just thinking if it was a site that was sort of infill and very few trees and hedgerows and you couldn't deliver it there, could you deliver it elsewhere? That was my question.
So it's set up that you can do that, but it's set up in a way to make it less attractive than providing it on site. Once you move away from the site, you have to then purchase credits, and those credits can be from sites that have been established and it's kept on a register. I believe it's Natural England or DEFRA hold the register, I can't quite remember, but they will hold the register, and you'll need to buy credits from those authorised sites. Alternatively, the government is going to have a register that they will hold, but that's seen as a temporary measure while the industry builds in terms of the nature recovery sites, etc., etc. But again, the expense associated with those gets more expensive the further away you get from the site. So it's to incentivise you to look at your site and try and make it deliver the 10% rather than having to purchase credits elsewhere.
And my last question is, could we have a project that people could part fund or contribute to deliver it, perhaps within the aims of what we're doing?
It's certainly something that we're looking into as to whether there are opportunities for us to be able to implement some form of a project that we could hold on a register or hold on a register of our own, and then people feed into. That, as with everything that's related to planning these days, is extraordinarily complicated. So we're just working through that, and that will be something that we'll follow at some point, I'm sure.
Thank you. More questions than answers at the moment.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Stephen and then it's Mike Kelly.
The only thing I was going to say, Madam Chairman, is actually the document that Ali has drawn together, I think is fantastically helpful. Appendix 1, and it's not actually that frightening when you look at the first page, enhancements for wildlife, for instance. It's very clear in what it says for this amount of development of this type. You need this number of enhancement features, and here are some of the enhancement features that you can have. And I don't know that a water butt or 2 integrated bird or bat boxes ought to frighten anybody. So I think that is a really helpful document, and echoing what Mr. Kinsella said about the meeting with agents who let us agree are a fairly a critical body, potentially, but they, I think, were perfectly accepting of this, and for the agents to have endorsed and embraced this, I think is an extremely good sign. So I think the direction is an extremely positive one. And I would like to congratulate Ali Coburn on the work that she's done here.
Thank you. And just remind members, this is a trial. These things will get ironed out if there is anything comes up. Mr. Kelly, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. we debated in a somewhat light fashion whether it's a good idea to experience the delightful experience of submitting a planning application. And I think we need to be careful not to complicate an already complicated process. And I think this document, this guidance, is very helpful in doing that. So, and I think it's to be applauded. I think the objective is, of course, something I trust we would all support. So that's good as well. I'm slightly concerned when we say that in 211 that every planning application must be submitted with a completed trigger list. That's fine. I know agents are familiar with that. Ecological impact assessment and survey reports. But we also refer to the need for a biodiversity net gain plan. So are we going to be beholden to an ecologist to have to draw up this information in every instance? Because if that is the case, it will be a disincentive and it will hold up validation of applications. So will this guidance, which as I say is very well, I support your views entirely on this, will this guidance mean that perhaps applicants do not have to go in every case to a qualified ecologist?
Steve.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, the guidance is voluntary, as we said at the start. So the idea is that we will try and engage with agents and applicants at pre-application stage, and that we will use things like the pre-application service and some targeted publicity to sort of talk about the benefits of sort of engaging in that process. In terms of the need to ensure that there is robust evidence, then yes, that may require an ecologist to be involved, particularly when we are talking about the baseline information. Having said that, I'm aware that a number of the agents that I've spoken to have started to use the metric, and both versions have said that it is reasonably straightforward, and it may be that you might be able to, in certain circumstances, especially the small sites metric, which is designed specifically not to be for an ecologist to complete, is an opportunity where you can ensure that you don't have those delays that you're talking about. But I don't think any of us should turn away from the importance of making sure, if we are to deliver meaningful contributions, the need for ecologists to be involved at some degree with some applications.
Thank you. Mr. Thwaites.
No, it's okay, thank you.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with previous speakers that actually this, the way this is so well set out, and you're right, actually identifying these are the actions you could take, is actually an improvement, I think, on what we've had up until now, where sometimes the impression has been given, and it is anecdotal, and one's got to treat it with care, that, oh, well, I just got asked by the planners to put up an extra bird box and a sparrow terrace or something, and that's supposed to make all the difference. And it was sometimes seen as a bit sort of, abstract and sort of random. Whereas what's great about this is it actually is much better at saying, no, look, this is the reason for doing it, and this is what you can do. And I like the idea of actions you can do. But leading on the last point, the one thing that concerns me is the actions apparently you need someone else to do, which is the qualified ecologist. Do we even have enough of those? Where are they going to come from? And that concerns me. And basically, at what threshold are you going to require a qualified ecologist? Or, as we currently do already, after all, on much, much bigger cases, quite often in farming, of course, around countryside stewardship and all that sort of stuff, is that the farmers themselves, basically, quite often, they often have advice, but a lot of them do it themselves, basically create their own audits and surveys of their own farms, very detailed maps in many cases, and so I suspect we will have some landowners will say, I know more about this than a qualified ecologist will, whether or not that's true. And the other issue is, am I right in understanding that we have already rolled out the biodiversity trigger list for all applications before we've sort of discussed it at this level? Or is that about something else? Thank you.
Dealing with the first question first. So all of the questions you've raised is questions that we as officers have, and nationally are being debated on a weekly basis. Are there enough ecologists what point does the ecologist do certain works, what points can the planner do a work, what point can an agent do some works, what point do they need to get specialist advice. And it sort of supports the fact that that's why we're looking to go with this guidance, is to enable us to be able to identify those things. So I haven't got a straightforward answer for you today around that, but this is what the guidance is there for us to do, to flesh out those issues. But I would repeat that this is something that's going to be done to us soon through legislation, and in some regards it will be what it will be in terms of whether there is an ecologist that needs to be involved, or what point does that ecologist need to be involved, how involved do they need to be, etc., etc. In terms of your second query, that is something separate, and it's actually just to pick up with general applications. It's a wildlife checklist to basically say the circumstances that we would expect an ecology survey to be submitted, and that's to deal with the general requirement for us to consider things like protected species, etc., etc. So it is a separate thing, and it's something that, again, during the trial period, we're going to have to think about how we're communicating that to say to people, you've got this responsibility that you've had for, you know, for forever. There's this new introduction of something else, and you've got to be looking at this separate. And I was on a course recently that was really focusing on that, to say you've got to think about these things completely separate and don't get confused and try and merge them together.
Thank you. Fran?
Thank you. I think the appendix is really good. It gives clear messaging for what we can do to mitigate. However, will there be conditions on the applications with timescales? So if someone has to erect a fence or a wall, will they have to do that within the same time of building the extension, etc.? And how can you ensure, which I think would probably be difficult, to say how many years you have to have this fruit tree or this back box for? I mean, hopefully people will realise the benefits of this and will want to support it, but there will be many people who say, yeah, well, we'll put in a couple of back boxes and that'll be fine.
So in some respects it's all of what you've just explained. So there will be times when conditions will be used, and that's something we do now. So, you know, your back box, for example, where we'll say that it will be erected and it'll be in a certain place, and then, you know, we want evidence that you've done that. And then there's an element of us trusting the general population to go, look, you know, you can see the benefit of it, just leave it alone, you don't need to do anything else with it. Where there is more significant net gain in terms of the delivery of that, then there is the need by the legislation says you have to protect it for 30 years. And that's when the legal agreements come in, so that's either a Section 106 or a conservation covenant, and there's lots of debates around which one they should use. From a very selfish perspective, Section 106 seems to be the slightly better route for us. It enables us to enforce as the planning authority. My understanding is, but I'm certainly no expert on conservation covenants, is I don't think we quite have the same power with those. And so that's how we would do it. So it would be through a legal agreement that the landowner would sign with us, and then that would go forward with the planning permission. It would also include things like monitoring plans, so there'll be a requirement for some form of monitoring, so whether it's years 2, 5, 10, 20, or whether it's, you know, a different strategy, that would depend on the particular case. And again, these are matters that from time to time will come up, and we'll have to rehearse those. And again, hopefully the guidance and us sort of going a little bit early on it will allow us to sort of think about those things and work through.
Can I just come back and say thank you very much? That sounds really positive. It's a lot better than I thought it was going to be.
Thank you. I have no other hands raised. Oh,
Sorry, Robin.
Just a couple of questions. One, first of all, really helpful, this, reasonably succinct. A couple of things I was going to ask around it, really. Can you give any estimate of what you might consider the cost is likely to be of implementing these measures, both to us as a planning authority on each application and to an average applicant, because it's going to be cost plus time as well. That's the first one. And if and do you feel that the added complexity might lead us to end up with a few more retrospective applications on our list, because people haven't been able to wait, particularly where ecologists are being required and there's a substantive time scale or wait for them to complete it. Third thing, the Appendix 1, really helpful. Just interested on it really, what constitutes a native tree? Is it one I can buy that's that tall, or is it one that's that tall? I know the native bit, but what constitutes tree? Because if it's buying one that you're going to plant to lead for a tree, there's going to be a lot of those planted, but there's going to be very, very little native hedgerow planted if 3 trees equates to 10 metres of native hedgerow planting. So there's an interesting balance there as to what determines on that list. And the other bit was on your last point, Dee, was around conservation covenants. Am I right in believing that current proposals are for conservation covenants to be administered the responsible authority likely to be Natural England? In which case there'd be another body then involved in any enforcement procedure for planning. I'll leave that with that. That's all. Thanks.
In terms of costs, to be honest, no, we don't. And again, that's what the process is about, is sort of just understanding, you know, is it going to mean that Ali is spending, you know, double the time now looking at sites to assess these things? Does it mean that officers are having to spend a lot more time on sites? Is it a mixture of both, which is probably likely? But again, you know, we'll think about how we go forward with that to see if we can quantify it, and then thinking about how we need to resource that. So we'll take it forward. I think for applicants, it's going to very much depend on the site. You know, if you've got pretty small sites, then you know, probably the impact isn't going to be as significant. Whereas if you've got, you know, more major schemes, there is an opportunity there for the cost to be quite considerable. But you'd like to think the scale of development will be dependent on who's doing the works and their means to be able to carry out the works. So we'll have to wait and see. The second point about more retrospective applications, I would hope not. I mean, we'll be trying to make sure the communications are right out there, to make sure that this isn't seen as this big scary thing, that actually it's something that you need to face and that we're here to help, and hopefully, you know, going through this process is going to help us somewhat. And I think even if we did get an initial run of retrospectives, my understanding is that that they will still be subject to the requirements. They don't sort of get away with it, and we sort of then have to, it's going to be more difficult, and I would suggest probably more painful for them to be able to deal with it retrospectively rather than dealing with it up front. So I think if there is that impact, it will be relatively temporary, I would think. The third point about the native trees and the size, it's a fair point, I guess, and it's something that we might want to add to the guidance over time, just to establish what it is. I mean, I would try not to complicate matters. We have landscape schemes coming all the time that talk about sort of, you know, you will plant this species of tree, it will be at this height and at this thing, and we would just look to implement the same sort of approach alongside that. So I don't see that as too much of a big issue. Conservation covenants, you understand the same as mine. Yes, I understand it would be by another authority or responsible authority. Selfishly, there's part of me that thinks that'd be quite nice. We haven't got the headache to go with it, but in reality, I think that there is an element as an authority we would have some form of control over that, just to be able to administer. But again, you know, that's going to have to be a process we go through. What happens when we do get the breach, and what are the consequences for that? You know, because of it's a legal agreement, is that straight to court therefore? And that might feel a little bit onerous and a bit over the top in certain circumstances. So it's going to be the case of watching case law, seeing what comes through the courts, and hoping we're not one of the first to get there.
Thank you. Claire, did you want to add anything?
Well, I think Dean's covered it really, but I was just going to emphasise that point about you know, guidance and communications. So the point of doing this is very much to help everybody. You know, as you can tell, we're all learning as we're going along, and so I think, you know, we're keen to get as much information out into the public domain as we can to, you know, alert people to this and to help them through the process. And, you know, behind the scenes, there's a really good
collaboration going on between local authorities, because we're all in the same boat. So, you know, we've been doing a lot of work with the counties. You know, there's lots of training the Planning Advisory Service has put on. The discussions going on as officers are, you know, kind of finding their way with this. I was going to mention actually, back to an earlier point that was made around, you know, understanding what it means for new members. We did there was a quite useful set of sort of little video clips just explaining this, which we will circulate again, so that you can just get a bit of, you know, a bit more background to it all in terms of training and familiarising yourself with it. So we will make that available to everyone again. But it is a, you know, it's a learning process for everybody basically.
Yeah. I've got another question from Nick and then Mike. Nick.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, just it's interesting. I looked at Appendix 1, and I assume where it says what constitutes one enhancement feature is it's or, isn't it? Not and. When you say 10 square metres native woodland, wide flowers meadow, not and 10 native hedgerow, and it's or. Is that right? Just clarify that. In other words, you don't have to do them all, you only have to do one.
No, it's just examples, yeah.
Right.
So you
I suppose
have a pick, you know, from the list.
I mean, the concern always comes with this is that if you end up putting a planning permission in, you have to put a report in that specifies how you do this. Because, you know, it started off with planning permission, like we did for floods. It ends up you have to have a huge flood report that costs thousands of pounds to do. It's the same with bats, you know, species like that. You have to put in a report. Is this going to be something here? Because I can see it's going to be a very onerous on people that are putting in small planning permission. And this starts, it's like everything, it starts off with good intentions, and it is, I support it. But it runs down the hill eventually, that all of a sudden we start employing consultants, professionals that come in that charge you a fortune, and it just goes out of control. And I'm just worried this is going to be something very similar.
So firstly, it's a legal requirement. It's not something that we're introducing. It's something that's being
well, we've got a dumb
nationally.
government, that's the problem.
Secondly, in the guidance in section 2, I didn't mention this, should have flagged it earlier, is that there are exemptions. So householder applications, permitted development, those sort of sites that have been developed for biodiversity net gain, and areas that are de minimis, they're called, so 25 metres squared or 5 metres for linear habitat. And also we believe, although we're still waiting for absolute confirmation on this, that small-scale self-build and custom housing will be exempted. So, you know, I think there is, in terms of providing a bit of reassurance, there are those exemptions. But no, I mean, there is a requirement for a biodiversity net gain plan, and, you know, and I think all of those concerns about costs and so on, you know, they are valid, obviously, but not things that are within our control.
Yeah, and just to follow on from that, I'd also point out that already quite a lot of our applications require things like preliminary ecological assessments, which is what they will need to do. Yes, there is a little bit of extra work around biodiversity net gain plans, etc., but there is already a cost associated with it, and some of that cost they will already be absorbing just through the general requirements of a planning application. So, as Claire said, it's a requirement, and what that will end up needing to be will be what it will be. But I think it's a case of us trialling it, and let's see where we are. But the requirements for it are the requirements for it.
Thank you. Mike. Oh, sorry. Did you want to come back? Sorry, I didn't realise you wanted to come back.
Quickly. I understand what you're going to do, go through the trialling process. Slightly concerned about when people are getting exemptions, because, I mean, things like a water butt, everybody could just put a water butt. There is no really exemption for that. It's so easy to do, not expensive.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to go through a huge report. And I understand what Dean is saying, but, you know, you're just adding the complication, the burden keeps going through. And it's not just the burden that's applying for the planning permission, it's the burden for the planning authority as well. And, you know, I know the government is going to make it legal, but, you know, unless we push back on some of these things, we just go down that road whether we like it or not.
Well, I don't think we'd want to push back on it because it's obviously positive in terms of delivering our national park purposes around conservation and enhancement. But just to say, in terms of those, the exemptions are from the requirement to achieve 10% biodiversity net gain, which is a certain process that we've been discussing. However, because of the policies in our local plan, which are around enhancement, we would still anyway be encouraging where we can those enhancements to take place. So the list that you've got in the appendix of things that anybody can do, like you say, would still be being encouraged. It's just that they're not a requirement in terms of, you know, achieving this 10%. So there is always going to be, you know, that enabling policy to...
It is actually the implementation, and that's, I suppose, that's what we need to keep an eye on. It's how you implement it more than anything else.
Thank you. Dr. Kelly.
I think I'm in a position, possibly a unique position, that I have had the experience of submitting applications, but also the experience of determining applications. So I've seen it from both sides of the fence, and that's been touched on before. Thank you. And it's reasonable. So I can see it from both sides. It's a very good objective. But we've also got to look at determination times of applications, and I cannot but feel that this will have an adverse impact on the determination times of our applications unless we have in place a very simple, user-friendly process. And I'm particularly concerned, it's already been mentioned about, if you like, upstream in terms of reliant on ecologists, because they are in very high demand, there are few of them, and that causes a delay straight away. And in terms of once a decision is made, I don't think, hopefully, we are going to be reliant on legal agreements to secure the implementation, because we all know there are many applications, including ones for affordable homes, for example, that are delayed in the system because of legal requirements, and Section 106 agreements take a long time. So I would hope that we could look at other mechanisms to try and ensure implementation. Otherwise, those determination times will definitely be extended, and that will have a negative impact on that particular performance target. And we did fall slightly short in terms of other applications, I noticed. So it's a risk. We meet one objective and then fail another objective. So we've got to try and look at this as a user-friendly, simple process. Otherwise, it will deter applicants and it will delay determination times. I'm sure you're aware of it, but we need to be very aware of that ourselves. Thank you.
We all get concerned about how long manuscripts take. I'm just checking, are there any more questions? Please move quickly. Right. So we have two recommendations: to agree the proposals to set out the trial from the 1st of August and provide for the introduction in November 2023, and to agree the Exmoor Specific Technical Guidance Note, which we've gone through, which I found really clear and helpful, actually. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you very much. So moving on, we've got Ruth moving up now. I'm just going to hand over to the Deputy Chairman of Planning to do this item.
I'm sorry, we've got a little technical difficulty, but hopefully we'll be there. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we'll move on to item 16, which is the Local Need Affordable Housing Assessment Report. Those of you that attended either in person or online the recent PPAG meeting will have gone through this in detail, and Ruth is now going to take us through the formal process that we need to before we can adopt the recommendations that you'll see on the first page. Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. So this time last year, we concluded the review, 5-year review of the local plan, and while it found that the policies didn't need review, we recognised that further work was needed with some key areas of implementation. So that included delivery of local affordable housing. Most of you will know, but some new members may not, that the local plan requires all new housing on Exmoor to meet a local need, and the priority is for local need affordable housing. So following the conclusion of the 5-year review and some other work that we've been doing with a neighbouring housing authority, we have commissioned consultants to do some work and produce a report on some key areas to help with our affordable housing delivery. So this slide just summarises those key areas. First of all, that it was important to have updated information, figures on housing affordability, which in turn then helps to inform what an affordable rent or affordable sale price would look like. And secondly, to look at some good practice and advise on approaches or an approach to assessing the eligibility of individual households to live in local need affordable housing that this planning authority permits. As a starting point, the consultants and the reports which they produce have emphasised the importance of recognising the different roles that our authority has relative to the housing authority. So national park authorities are in an unusual position because most local authorities combine both functions of planning and housing duties. In a national park authority, we are the planning authority, so our responsibilities relate to that. So we produce the local plan, the planning policy framework. We're responsible for agreement, secure affordability and occupancy on housing we permit, local need housing. And so therefore our affordable housing involvement is focused on those plan policies, extra guidance, supplementary planning documents or SPDs, and of course our development management or function with associated work with communities to deliver those. And the consultants have reiterated that housing authorities have greater capacity and particular skills and expertise around housing matters. They will therefore most likely do the majority of practical implementation of housing matters, and they have already in-house experience and skills around the assessment of applicants' eligibility to live in affordable housing, but in the case of Exmoor, will be based on our local connection criteria set out in the National Park local plan. I think it's just important just to reiterate that. Going into more detail in the report itself, which is attached as Appendix 1 to the committee report, the 3 key areas that they looked at in terms of data linked to affordability of housing on Exmoor was first of all local incomes, which is obviously fundamental. That drives what people are able to afford. They looked at Cameo household data, which is very detailed income data for households, goes down to a very local level, but does include sources of income that may not be wages, for example pensions, that may not reflect what working households could afford. They looked at Office of National Statistics ASH data, which is annual survey of hours and earnings, which reflects actual wages, but only exists at local authority level. So they've averaged it for North Devon and what would have been Somerset West and Taunton areas to give a figure for the national park. And they also looked helpfully at indicative worker wages, so this is generally public sector earnings, for example, health sector earnings, and also minimum wage and living wage figures. So it gives a picture, if you like, of what people are likely to be able to afford locally. They also then looked at the cost of housing. This is housing on Exmoor that exists now, looking at house price data from Land Registry, price paid data, and then subsequently rent as well, using data from Zoopla. What did it show in terms of the affordability of housing across Exmoor? We're not talking here specifically about housing we've permitted with a local need tie. This is the housing that is out there that's available. So it showed, you use the earnings data from ASH, that wages were in the region of £21,500 to £27,000 a year. That they were looking at all of different good practice. They also looked at what should be considered affordable. So they said renting should take up no more than 25% of a household's income before tax, and that for buying no more than 3.5 times their income. And that sets the measure then of whether things are affordable. And the tables on the right of this slide then set out that if we're looking at rented housing on Exmoor, using the data they collected, households would need to find between 28.5% and 29% of income, so that wouldn't be considered to be affordable. And if you were looking at buying a house on Exmoor, using a local wage, if the income level is described, we're looking at between 9 and roughly 10 times your income, again well above 3.5 times that they suggest. And I mean, that probably isn't a surprise to most people, but it's useful to have that data in front of us. So they've then gone on in the report, in the technical report, to analyse the weight against income, to analyse what would be needed for housing we permit as locally affordable in terms of rental levels or purchase prices that would be within the range of people on Exmoor, given local income. And they've done that looking at different types of housing, so detached, semi-detached, flats, terraces, and size, 1 bedroom to 4 bedroom housing. And the tables, again, which are in the committee report, show the range of discounts that are suggested, the data suggests would be needed for housing to be affordable for people renting and buying. So sorry, buying in the first instance, and then the maximum price that would need to be set at, and then to be genuinely affordable, the level of rent in the final column of the second table that would be needed in order for them to be affordable to people and not take up more than 25% of their income. And they also take account in that of local housing allowance rates, which are those that set what housing benefit payments will be pitched at. And so it's the lower of the two figures. The consultants set out a series of recommendations in their report. First, some overarching findings which recognise that for Exmoor there's been a long-standing commitment to prioritise affordable housing for its local communities. The important point we talked about earlier of cooperation needed between the National Park Authority and the housing authorities, because we have different roles, hopefully complementary but different roles and skills. That our role is very firmly around planning policy and development management, and that housing authorities are able to provide specialist skills for complex assessments because of their function. And then the report sets out a series of 5 recommendations, and these are summarised on this slide. So first of all, they recognise the existing and long-standing joint working that we have with our housing authorities, but they suggest this needs to be formalised, in particular to enable the housing authorities to assess applicant eligibility for living in local need affordable housing, and that we should be requesting that formally, but also alongside that recognition that there may be some additional support required for self and custom build because of its complexity, and that's something that they go into a bit more detail on in the report. And that in the meantime, we currently set affordable sale prices and rents on new housing that we submit as local need, and where people come in for existing housing where it's going to be a change of owner or tenant, and that we should continue to use our current processes, including also on the eligibility of applicants as to whether they can live in a local need affordable home, whether they qualify, have a local connection, etc. And the second but linked point is that we should be producing, as an authority, affordable housing guidance. They suggest a supplementary planning document which would give it maximum weight as a material consideration, and that will provide advice and clarity to everyone involved in the process. It could be a very positive move to do that, and they then set out some specific things it could cover, should cover, for example, clarity on what would constitute an local employment connection, advertising and marketing requirements for affordable housing, and a revision and inclusion of Section 106 templates in that guidance, including setting out how we calculate affordable rent and sale prices. We would be using, I think, the data that they've produced, but I suppose we ought to emphasise that we're continuing to work on the sale and rent price and with our local housing authorities while we sort of work towards producing further guidance if that's agreed today. So finally, the recommendation before you is to note the consultant's technical report and its recommendations, and the officer discussions taking place with the housing authorities to take these forward, to agree sale prices of new and existing affordable housing, having due regard to the indicative affordable prices and discounts in the committee report based on that in the consultant's report, and that rent levels of new and existing affordable housing should be based on the approach, again in the committee report, table 4.2. Finally, we're asking you to consider and agree Exmoor National Park Authority producing affordable housing guidance set out in Section 5 of the report.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm sorry I had to temporarily leave the room. John, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, sorry, you may have answered this in the bit of your presentation I missed because I didn't want to cough over you, so I left. Yeah. I mean, I very much welcome this. I mean, I'm sure we all have been asked by people why affordable homes aren't affordable or what affordable means, and you know, all sorts of questions around it. So something specific to point out is really useful. But I want to make, and I'm sure that we'll have a long discussion about this, and then we'll vote on it. So I want to make sure I understand what we're voting on. Because the recommendation is 2.1 I'm talking about. It's about sale prices. It talks about the recommendations we have due regard to the table in 4.1, and the table in 4.1 talks about indicative affordable housing prices and says that further consideration of viability will be needed. So it clearly doesn't mean that, for example, a 3-bedroomed house will have to be affordable, will have to be sold at £144,055 or less. But it means something like that, but I don't know quite what and how it would fluctuate. At the moment, obviously, house prices are flat, and today average mortgage rate's just gone up to 6%. So they're unlikely to rocket upwards in the future, but often they normally go up. So how do the numbers fluctuate in order to reflect the housing market? That's really, I don't understand what it means.
It's a really good question. I think, first of all, just to say, we feel as officers, it's a really useful technical report. It provides the data to show us what consultants think when they look at the numbers is needed for housing to be genuinely affordable based on local income. The reason for the words due regard is because further work is needed to take this forward, including discussions with the housing authorities. And there is a slightly complex situation in that we have existing affordable housing, which has some of Section 106 is slightly different going back in time. And we've also got the new housing that we will receive applications for, we know, and we will be looking to consider and determine. So we want some clarity because we've got the data in the report and the reflected in the committee report in front of you, but we need to just consider it on a case-by-case basis, I think, realistically, while we bottom out the planning guidance, which I think is where this will be set out with more, I suppose, that will be set out in the future, which will come back to you to be agreed, if you agree to us preparing some planning guidance. So I think the future question, how do we deal with fluctuations in the market, to answer your question. The consultants have agreed as part of this contract that they will be providing us with updated annual data, and we have the methodology in front of us, which will enable updates to happen, because you're right, the housing market doesn't stand still. What is also set out in this technical report is a process for ensuring, if you're looking at discounted market sale housing, which is housing where you apply discounts to the equivalent value for an open market home, that will be based on a clear sort of methodology to ensure that the open market valuation is robust, so that the discount then applies from that, but it will need keeping up to date those discounts, because incomes and house prices, rents do fluctuate. I hope that answers your question.
So it means something like that if it were a 3-bedroom house, there'd be a discount of around 50%. Is that right?
Yeah, and we recognise that's high, which is why we use the word viability in this report.
Francis, and then Nick.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Hugely complicated, difficult and valuable piece of work. Made more difficult by the fact that the income data isn't right, in that the very local data will overestimate incomes because it includes pensions, and we know that certainly for a large part of the park, the income is in the pensions of the people who've retired here and not in the median wage of the people who live and work here. So the local data is unhelpful because it overestimates household incomes. The data which only deals with earned income, which is much more relevant, for a different reason also overestimates it, because both in North Devon and in Somerset West and Taunton, we know that the level incomes in the less isolated areas are higher. So whichever way we go, it's going to be wrong, and it's going to be wrong in an unhelpful direction. And you've had to do, and the consultants have had to do, the best they can with it. But we need to hold that in mind all the time. That's perhaps not a question. I mean, that's just it's something we know we need to take account of. There are a couple of things that I want to mention. Just as a matter of accuracy, page 166 of the papers, which is page 8 of Appendix 1 of Item 16, which is the parishes within or partly within Exmoor National Park. Brushford is not mentioned and should be. It only has a small part in, a little bit less than, say, Skilgate has in, but it needs to be recognised that Brushford has an area in the park. That's one. Then page 246 is the new authority is in existence. The Somerset West and Taunton isn't there anymore. So that the paragraph, when I can get to page 246, it's somewhere in the middle of the page, is perhaps not quite right now, but was almost certainly right when the report was written. But we just need to make sure we're not feeling out of date. Okay. And that last one is perhaps the one that matters quite as much as anything. Yes, it's 10.9 on page 246 was the one I was there. Page 251, there was a statement which said that, for example, private rent will not be affordable housing. I'm really quite worried about that. My thinking was in two directions. I absolutely think we're right. The housing authority should be assessing eligibility. I'm sure that's a good move. What we should not require people to do is to be on their housing list, because that's not what we're about. We're a planning authority. Yes, we want them to assess, but to say, and that ties in with the private rent. Why on earth should a private rented house not be permitted with its proper local affordable tie on it? And we can ask the housing association, the housing authority, to assess whether that person is eligible. I don't think that we should. I think we should avoid requiring people to be on their list, because for all the reasons that we all know about, and of course we're not requiring self-builders, surely, to be on that list. So there's just something there that I think. I'm sure we note the recommendations of the report. We absolutely agree that officers should be discussing with and taking those recommendations forward with housing authorities. But we need to be quite careful that we don't land ourselves in a different bind.
Thank you. Thank you. Nick?
I think my question is quite simple compared to what Francis said. Plus the fact I couldn't find page 260, whatever it was. Mine only went up to 19. On the item 4.2, where it talks, just to clarify my own understanding, we're talking about a one-bedroom house, 105 and 290,000 pounds, and a discount market price of 25%. So, am I saying that the 105,000 pound is already a discounted price, or is it 25% discounted of that?
That's the discounted price.
Sorry.
Hang on. Are you speaking to me, Stephen?
Sorry. We're just agreeing that's a discounted price. I think we've all been sat here doing some maths.
Ruth is probably the person who can tell me.
What I'm saying is the £105 already the 25% discounted price?
Yes.
Right. So in other words, if we took 25% and put it onto that one, that would be the value of the property.
Yes, and if you go into the full report, the figures are set out.
No, I know you won't. Okay. But they are, I mean, you're not going to get a flat for that sort of price, are you? Or am I missing the point here?
What this is showing is what price would be needed on in this case, one-bed flat on Exmoor for it to be considered to be affordable for people on the wages that they set out.
Okay, thanks.
So at the moment you have all your market houses out there which is showing are not affordable for people on local wages. What this is saying is of those local need houses that we permit, or flats that we permit on Exmoor, for the ones that would be for sale, this would be the value, 105 to 290 would be the value that it would need to be set at. And the way that the technical report, the consultants suggest that should be done, is that you would set a process up where at the point of sale, the owner of that house or the builder of that house would get an evaluation done that was robust and that would be an agreed way of doing it. You would then set the discount from that, and the current price that they're saying with the current data would be the maximum should be 105 290. That would be the maximum asking and selling price. It may not be sold for that, it may be sold for less, but it couldn't be sold for more.
Can I come back on that? Just trying to understand, maybe I'm being a bit thick here at the moment. But, so what we're saying, let's take an example. So somebody earns £25,000 on Exmoor as a wage, and then you've used that value, an average value, to come up with £105, that £5,000 as what would be affordable for that person. Is that what we're saying?
So what we...
Am I just making it simple, or...?
broadly, I think what this report sets out is an approach, a formula, if you like, that you would use, which takes account of income and value of prices out there, which is regularly updated. And that formula will need to be set out in planning guidance so that everyone's clear if they're looking at building a house of this kind or
But they probably wouldn't be able to afford to build a house at that price.
and we are very aware of looking at the data, what the data shows of the need to make sure that any process that we have going forward is carefully thought through for our circumstances. So that's why we will need to be continuing discussions with our housing authority, and this would eventually be set out in planning guidance in a form that will be come back to you in the future. So this is the first step, if you like, of some work.
So this is really a theoretical process that comes out with a number, because we know you're not going to get houses at that sort of prices, are you?
I think there can be a difference. I don't want to get into the absolute.
No, I'm just trying to understand myself, because it's not an easy. Well, it's a relatively easy subject. So what we're saying is that if somebody earns a certain amount of money on Exmoor, then we look at the price of being 105,000 roughly for a one-bedroom flat. That's the value we've put on it, but it doesn't actually apply into the practical terms, as you probably wouldn't be able to get one at 105. Is that? Am I missing a point somewhere?
Stephen.
Well, put it around the other way. I think what this is saying is, on an average Exmoor wage, this is what you could properly afford.
Okay.
Right? So therefore, what Ruth is saying is, we've then got to square the circle of saying, is it possible to produce houses at that price? But that is really the maximum that somebody should be able, or being in the position of being able to afford. Now, it may well be, and it's a very difficult thing to say, that there will have to be tough conversations with people to say, you might have the aspiration to buy your own house. You cannot do it, really, with the income that you have. But that is a really difficult conversation, I'm afraid. But that's the position.
Sorry, thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, no, it does help very much. So. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nick. So, Jeremy, you're the next person to put your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I also declare an interest here because I'm part of a community trust that's got an application in for affordable housing. But what I'd like to say is that the other side of this is actually the viability assessment, actually being able to provide a house and get a housing association to support your application, where all they will get in rent is X price per week. And we went through this exercise with a new housing association where they showed us the magic numbers that they use, and the frightening costs per square metre of construction at the moment means that viability is a very, very tricky thing, and it depends entirely on central funding. So this is completely academic, unless funding centrally is forthcoming. That's the point I'd like to make.
Thank you, that was helpful. Are there any... Oh, Mandy.
Just a quick point for me. It would have been nice to see a couple of case studies actually from young people locally. I know we've got the Exmoor Young Voices that do a lot around sort of housing and need, and I just think if you have a few case studies, it just sort of brings the report alive. I just put it there. It would be nice to hear their voices in the report. Thank you.
Rural Housing Week as well, I should stress that.
Thank you for that. Right. Very briefly, please, because I do have an eye on how long we can keep meetings going on for.
Thank you. Just very briefly, I should have said when I was doing the introduction that on Exmoor there's a range of different affordable households in different circumstances, and some people rely on the lowest, most affordable rents, which are social rents through housing association properties. And these figures relate to other kinds of affordable housing that are not controlled by housing associations, because those rents are set nationally through a national, through a national formula. So I just thought to have made that clear. And of course, in those cases, grant is absolutely fundamental from
So these are really the highest.
these are providing choices out there as a sort of options for affordable housing. So you've got your housing association, social rented ideally, and then you've got this provides other opportunities like through custom and self-build or private rented, but still with a local tie and still aiming at being affordable for those locally.
Oh, that's quite useful, thank you. Right, so what we're being asked to do is note the consultant's technical report and
agree that officer discussions with that
and the doctor's discussions with the housing authority takes forward. Agree the sale price of new and existing affordable housing will have due regard to the various tables. Rent levels of new and existing affordable housing is based on the approach in table 4.2. And agree that ENPA will produce affordable housing planning guidance as set out in section 5. Can I have a proposal, please?
Indeed, but could we also note the point about Brushwood, because that is actually quite an important one.
And include Brushwood in the parishes.
Yes.
Of 40. Right, I need a proposal. Oh, you proposed. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Right, moving on to personal update. So we say goodbye to David Thomas, who's been working our field services in the States, and we're also going to say goodbye to Gordon, who's not here.
He's gone.
Bruce,
Bruce.
could you grab Gordon?
Ben doing his first duty in dragging Gordon back.
Thank you for coming back, Gordon. We know you've had quite a lot of input today. So I'm just going to hand over to our Chief Executive for a moment.
Thank you, Chair. Gordon. Gordon started with us back in 2015, so he's been with us 8 years, and just wanted to say a few words really of thanks. And we all know that Gordon is great with numbers, and he's good with a spreadsheet, he's good with audit, but he's not just an accountant. He's got a degree in history and politics, he's got a postgrad diploma in law, as well as his MSc in management and finance, and I think it's that and a rounded, holistic view of the world that's meant he's been absolutely brilliant in LT. He's always ready to challenge, he's always ready to make us think in a slightly different way, and I've really, really welcomed that, and I want to thank you, Gordon. That's all you've done for me and for LT and for this organisation. Thank you. Gordon's a trail runner. He likes camping, he likes the great outdoors when he's not looking at a spreadsheet. And when he applied, he said he would simply love to work for a national park. But I just want to say, Gordon, we've loved working with you, and we wish you all the very best in your new role at Torridge. Thank you and well done.
I have to say I will miss you as well, because Gordon previously worked for Devon County Council, so, but who knows, who your auditor might be over in Torridge. So we now have, we do have an item 18, and that's any other business of urgency, and again I'm going to hand over to Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is the approval of a Section 151 officer who's just now leaving the room. So staffing matters are usually dealt with by the Chief Exec, obviously in consultation with HR. But in the case of leadership team members, standing orders state that a senior member must be involved on the interview panel. And that's taken place this time. So we've had an open, competitive process to replace Gordon as Head of Finance and Operations. And the result is that Ben Barrett, who's been sitting through this meeting, who's just left, has been successful. So he'll be known to some of you because he was here previously. He was the post holder before Gordon. So he's coming back, which is fantastic. Now the other thing we have to do is we have to have at all times a Section 151 officer. And we've spoken with Ben, and Ben has agreed to take on that role as soon as Gordon leaves. So he'll be covering for that period that we've got through July and August when we won't have Gordon. So though it's not necessary for LP appointments to go through the full authority, it's been requested previously by our bank and other key stakeholders that it does come to authority on the 151, so that you've got reassurance that there is this oversight. Okay, so the recommendation, verbal recommendation, to approve the appointment of the Section 151 officer for interim period from 1st of July.
So I didn't even see who said they were going to. Sorry, Jeremy, thank you. And John, you're happy second. So all those in favour, please. And Judy, that's unanimous. So I'd now like to close this meeting. Thank you so much. Thank you for your forbearance. I'm so sorry I had to go out of the room. I just wanted to do. Quite honestly. I will be better next time. So we have lunch now. I want to remind you that we have our next meeting is at 2 p.m. prompt.